Chapter 99. New York's military base, the general's residence. Unlike Nissan, where night had just fallen and the time difference was reversed, New York had just had a night. General Chester took off his uniform and changed into his pajamas. He finally fell asleep with his wife in the early hours of the morning, but he didn't expect to be woken up by a messenger knocking on the door. "What's the rush?" General Chester was surprised, but he knew there was something important to report. He could only put on an officer's jacket over his pajamas. As soon as he opened the door, the messenger said with a hurried face, "Sir. Last night, Miss Lucy Jane, who was under the protection of the elite team at High Lawn Street, went missing." "What did you say?" General Chester deeply furrowed his brows and held back his anger as he asked, "What about the armed forces stationed at High Lawn Street 24 hours a day? What are the soldiers doing? And I was only notified about last night's incident this morning." The messenger replied with a bit of embarrassment, "There are a total of 25 armed soldiers stationed at High Lawn Street. They were all knocked out last night and were only discovered this morning." They were all knocked out? Could it be that some country or organization invaded? General Chester muttered to himself. The messenger continued, "According to the reports of the soldiers who woke up, the one who knocked them out should be the same person. Very powerful. Nonsense. A person who can take out an armed force without a sound, how can he not be powerful?" General Chester coldly snorted. The first person he thought of was Cale. Perhaps, he was the only one who possessed that sort of strength. Could it be that the man didn't reach Nissan, but instead turned back halfway? General Chester calmly asked, "What about the transport jet carrying Major General Cale?" "The flight is normal. According to the time, we should be arriving at Tokyo in Nissan soon." The messenger quickly replied, which made General Chester fall into deep thought again. The messenger asked, "Sir, do we need more people to search New York and find Miss Lucy Jane's whereabouts? The guards only knocked her out and didn't kill her. This should be Major General Cale's arrangement." General Chester thought for a bit and sighed helplessly, "Inform the original armed forces stationed at High Lawn Street and have them search in secret. No matter what, they were lost under our watch. If Major General Cale comes back..." At this point, he suddenly stopped and didn't continue. That person went to Tokyo, Nissan alone. How could he come back? At this moment. At the border of Tokyo, Nissan, 6,000 meters in the air. Amidst the thick thunder clouds, 2 Japanese fighter jets were fleeing for their lives. Under the illumination of thunder and lightning, a fighter jet's indicator light dimmed as it tumbled and fell. What the hell? As the ace pilots of the Nissan Air Force, this was the first time they had encountered such a monstrous enemy. Without relying on any weapons, he had destroyed 5 high-performance single fighter jets by himself. Furthermore, he had chased them from an altitude of more than 10,000 meters to the lightning strike cloud area at an altitude of 6,000 meters. At this moment, the pursuit was still ongoing. That's an absolute monster. It's a humanoid demon. Speed up. Speed up and leave this area." The remaining 2 pilots panicked and didn't know what to do. They could only refuel the fighter jets and speed up, shuttling through the dark clouds like headless flies. At an altitude of about 100 meters behind, Cale quickly glided out of the darkness. The last 2 fighters in his field of vision were getting farther and farther away as they sped up. They were about to escape from the limit of his field of vision. Want to run? It's not that simple. His face was expressionless. He pulled out a blue card from the card space and threw it forward with 2 fingers. The card immediately summoned a blue-feathered eagle behemoth in a wide enough altitude. The blue eagle, it was the real overlord of the sky. Cale landed on the blue eagle's flapping wings. His left hand grabbed a few steel-hard feathers. Before he issued an order, the blue eagle seemed to have sensed something and screamed, flapping its huge wings and rushing forward. With a simple flapping sprint, the Blue Eagle reached supersonic speed. The whistling wind in front of him was like a knife, so much so that Kale had to enter the venom state. However, the effect was also very significant. In 10 seconds, the two fighters quickly reflected in Kale's field of vision and continued to enlarge. Holding the feathers with his left hand, Kale stood steadily on the blue eagle's back. His empty hand pulled out the sodium-carbon steel sword on his back that he hadn't used before. His palm covered by the vibranium arm guard held the sword tightly. His upper body leaned back, his right hand arched, and he made a javelin-throwing motion. Whoosh! The next moment, the one-handed sword was thrown out with a gust of wind. It swept across a distance of 20 meters in an instant and successfully hit the fuel tank at the back of the fighter in front of him. The sodium-carbon steel sword penetrated the fuselage's outer shell, causing the internal fuel to spill out along the blade. Kale kept up and jumped from the back of the Blue Eagle. When he was in the air, he used air sprint. His whole body was like a dark bullet, rushing straight to the bottom of the leaking fuel tank of the fighter. The dark claws swung upwards, and the steel outer shell of the fuselage suddenly splashed with sparks. The sparks triggered the fuel tank and burst into flames. Boom! The fighter disintegrated and fell, and Kale's body was blown away by the explosion at close range. Venom was very sensitive, and it ejected a black line outwards, entangling the sodium-carbon steel sword that also flew out and retrieving it. The Blue Eagle screeched and swept over the edge of the explosion area, catching Kale, who was affected by the explosion. Kale continued to sit firmly on the feathers. Even with his inhuman physique, the explosion also effectively burned the venom suit protection on his left hand and the skin on his arm. It looked bloody. But soon, the skin healed at a speed visible to the naked eye, and venom also followed the rhythm and repaired the damaged part of the suit. This was what made Kyle so frightening. He already had an abnormal super soldier physique. Coupled with his self-healing ability, he could do whatever he wanted in battle. He could disregard his own injuries and unleash superhuman attacks with all his might. It is not an exaggeration to describe him as a monster. There is one more fighter. Kale was indifferent and ruthless. He looked like a killing god under the full coverage of the venom suit. He did not intend to let go of the enemy who attacked him tonight. Next, the Blue Eagle took him to catch up with the last fighter. In less than 10 seconds, the fighter crashed without a pilot. 5 minutes later, thousands of meters above the Tokyo border of Nissan, the Blue Eagle gently flapped its wings and hovered in the air. Kale was sitting on its back, panting slightly, and holding a Nippon pilot in his left hand. The pilot hasn't lost his life yet, but his eyes were slightly rolled up, and he was in a semi-conscious and semi-conscious state. White foam was coming out of his mouth, and he was muttering in Japanese vaguely. Monster, Kale grabbed the pilot on the last fighter. He wanted to torture Nissan's military information, but he didn't expect the other party to be so useless. He was scared to death before he even started. Then there is no point in keeping you. Kale shook his head and was about to throw away the pilot in his hand, but venom conveyed a thought to him, and then the black liquid derived from the suit formed a tentacle, and the tip of the tentacle quickly probed the back of the other party's head. Chapter 100. What was transmitted to his mind was not fragmented and messy memory fragments, but more like the essence of information intercepted from other people's memory sponge after careful selection. Memory search? Kale was extremely shocked as he didn't expect Venom's auxiliary talent to have made another breakthrough. Venom was like a child, conveying its excitement. It told him that this was just using the symbiotic characteristics of its own race to temporarily attach part of its body to the skull of a weak life form, and the dominant, sharing, intercepted the memory data of that life form. This is no longer a simple symbiosis. Kale frowned. The original symbiosis of Venom's life form was mainly based on mutual benefit. That is, while attaching itself to the host to learn their talents and survive to strengthen itself, it would give back to the host to strengthen itself, and even take the initiative to protect the host emotionally. This was the current symbiosis mode between him and Venom. Because he was the dominant host, Venom couldn't even affect his left and right consciousness and actively read his thoughts, let alone intercept brain memories. For a long time, Kale had regarded Venom as a biological battle suit with its own learning ability, until tonight, Venom's characteristic of attaching itself to a weak host, endangering life and searching memories. It was simple and overbearing, with the concept of mutual benefit and mutual assistance, and relying on symbiosis to become the master of other life forms. Your evolution has almost caught up to me when I was drawing cards. I don't know how far you will grow in the future. Kale whispered to Venom, who had transformed into a battle suit. Venom conveyed its doubts back in surprise. Its intelligence was still at the growth stage of a normal 6-year-old child, and it obviously couldn't understand Kale's words. One day, you will understand. Kale said with a smile. As the card master, he wasn't afraid that Venom would betray and harm him in the future. Moreover, as long as he could maintain a strong lead, he could permanently be the master in the symbiosis mode, and Venom wouldn't be able to force him to give in. The increase in Venom's growth characteristics was more beneficial than harmful to him. Okay, let's go to the Nissan Air Force Base in Tokyo. Kale tossed aside his messy thoughts and patted the Blue Eagle's head. He pointed his finger to the left and let the Blue Eagle set off toward the Air Force Base that the Japanese pilots knew. His thoughts were clear, he was here as an intruder to pressure Nissan. Just assassinating Nissan's higher-ups? There wasn't much meaning to it. If they killed one, they would quickly elect a second one. Therefore, assassinating the emperor was only a small step towards achieving world peace. If one wanted to make a country feel fear, panic, and ultimately force it onto the path of surrender, one would have to be even more savage than it was. Even more domineering. Even more heartless. Therefore, on the first night he arrived. It was very important. If he wanted to do something big, he had to let everyone in this country know that he was here. Kale of the United States was here. Whoosh, the Blue Eagle let out a loud cry and flapped its wings fiercely. A small whistling wind swept behind it, blowing away the clouds and mist within 30 meters. In the dark night, it carried Kale and rushed into the distance at supersonic speed. Nissan, Tokyo, the headquarters of the Air Force Base. Report, report. Commander Okamura, something bad has happened. A Nissan sergeant wearing a yellow military uniform and white gloves hurried to the command room of the Air Force headquarters. Baka. The commander with a short beard on the office chair was sleepy and was startled by the sergeant who walked in. He glared at the front angrily and scolded, "Do you know the military rules? How can you be so flustered when you come to the command room?" "Yes, Commander." The sergeant stood in the room with a slight grievance and saluted. "Speak, what's the matter? Did the Purple Lightning fighter sent out return after completing the mission?" Commander Okamura asked. In his opinion, sending the elite Purple Lightning fighter team with the highest record of completing missions to deal with a transport fighter without much combat ability was a sure win. The 7 ace pilots even made a military order before departure. If they failed, they would commit seppuku. No, no. The sergeant took a deep breath and replied with a trembling voice, "Not long ago, the signals of the 7 Purple Lightning fighters all disappeared." "What did you say?" This time it was Commander Okamura's turn to be emotionally unstable. He jumped up from his chair and slammed his palm on the desk. What happened? Could it be that the information from the United States was false? The other party was not a transport fighter? I'm not sure. The sergeant stammered. Before the 7 Purple Lightning fighters lost their signal with the command room, someone sent back an emergency signal. But soon the location disappeared at the border of Nissan. It's very likely that they all crashed. No matter how good the new fighter is, it's impossible to destroy all 7 Purple Lightning fighters in such a short time. Commander Okamura was still very confident in the fighter developed by his country. He pondered and said, "Immediately contact all the ace pilots in the base and approve their departure to the border airspace where the signal disappeared." If they encounter enemy fighters, destroy them immediately. I'll arrange it immediately. The sergeant saluted and accepted the order. He quickly turned around and was about to walk out of the command room. Just then, a soldier rushed in with a panicked expression. The two of them bumped into each other and fell to the ground in a sorry state. What the hell? When Commander Okamura saw this scene, the anger that he had suppressed was once again ignited uncontrollably. But before he could ask, the soldier rushed in and reported, causing the command room to fall into a dead silence. "Commander, there's an enemy attack. The enemy has broken into our air base." What? Commander Okamura and the sergeant opened their mouths wide in shock. Just a moment ago, the 7 fighters they sent out were suspected to have crashed at the border of Tokyo in Nissan. The next moment, the air base here in Tokyo was attacked by the enemy? Commander Okamura had seen all kinds of war scenes. He quickly regained his composure and asked in a deep voice, "Tell me clearly. What enemy attack? Where did the enemy come from? How many are there?" "They came from the main entrance of the base." The enemy. The soldier clenched his teeth and didn't get up from the door. He was close to the limit of his mental endurance as he shouted, "The enemy, there's only one person. Our soldiers are all dead. They're all dead. He's coming. He's coming this way." The soldier's voice suddenly stopped. He seemed to have heard something. His eyes were wide open and his face was pale. He curled up on the floor and shivered. Ta. While the command room was in complete silence, the sound of light footsteps could be heard from the corridor outside. The soldier crawled on the floor in fear and crawled forward to make way for the door. He was still mumbling in a barely audible voice. Chapter 101. Tokyo Air Force Base, Command Room. Commander Okamura, a sergeant, and a guard correspondent. The 3 people in the room were holding their breaths nervously, trying to hide it from the enemy. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly. In this oppressive and suffocating atmosphere, the footsteps in the corridor were getting closer and clearer, knocking heavily on their hearts. Tap tap, the footsteps stopped outside the door, and then a tall dark red figure rushed out. The moment it appeared, the room was suddenly filled with killing intent and the smell of blood. Commander Okamura was able to get his current glorious military position. He had experienced countless battles and climbed out of the pile of corpses countless times. But at this time, he still took a deep breath. He had goosebumps all over his body, and he couldn't help but back off against the wall, suppressing the urge to escape from here. The enemy standing at the door couldn't be simply described as a human at all, it was clearly a humanoid monster. Its scarlet and slender eyes were cold and indifferent. Its tough and dark horny skin was stained with blood. Its perfect muscles gave off a dangerous aura of wildness and power. Its fists were extended with dark claws that were as sharp as those of a wolf beast. Such a humanoid monster slowly walked into the room. The biological aura that was full of killing and tyrannical aesthetics made people unable to have any thoughts of fighting against it. It was like a bird seeing a falcon. The difference between the two was a difference of a few levels in the biological pyramid. "Sure enough, you're here." The demon-like humanoid monster grinned and spoke fluent Japanese in a hoarse voice. Its scarlet eyes stared at Commander Okamura in the room. Commander Okamura was even more shocked as he gasped for breath. He put his hands on the desk to hide his weak legs and asked in horror, "You? What kind of monster are you?" "Commander. Didn't you send 7 fighter jets to kill me?" The humanoid monster smiled like a human and withdrew from the integrated form that was fully covered by venom, revealing the handsome face of a young man. The tough keratinous membrane on his body turned into a leather battle suit as the black liquid flowed in a straight line. "It's you. America's Kyle." Commander Okamura was in disbelief as he stared at Kyle, who had returned to his normal appearance. A few hours ago, Nissan officials and the military had actively discussed and decided to use the Air Force to intercept the target as soon as it entered Tokyo's airspace. This was to severely reduce the UA's morale. But now, not only had the 7 Violet Lightning fighters failed to annihilate the enemy had even come knocking on their door and forced their way into the Air Force base. Commander Okamura forced himself to accept the shocking facts at the moment. He trembled and didn't know what to say. This was too unreasonable. It was a pity. Germany, which had already withdrawn from the battlefield of World War II, had no time to remind Nissan. Be careful of Kale. After all, Kale was such an unreasonable person. If he could make a move, he would be unreasonable. If he could face a head-on confrontation, he would never admit defeat. His existence represented the word powerful. 7 Violet Lightning fighters. If they could not defeat him, then they would all be destroyed. The Hydra base factory with stronger armed weapons and the Frankfurt military base with many more soldiers were all conquered by him. How could Nissan's Air Force base stop him? With 12 times the physique of a human, plus hundreds of combat skills, as well as Venom's outer skin protection and characteristics, ordinary soldiers were simply too fragile in front of Kale. No matter how stubborn the Nippon soldiers were, and how fearless they were, under the absolute crushing strength gap, they were nothing but clay chickens and pottery dogs. Commander. Kale looked at Commander Okamura indifferently and said meaningfully, "I really want to see your so-called Bushido spirit, so I came here." Commander Okamura's face was livid with anger and shock, but soon he sighed with a heavy face. On the wall next to the red sun flag, he took down the fine tachi made of steel like a handicraft. The sergeants and correspondents all bowed their heads and crawled on the ground, not daring to persuade him. Under Kale's oppressive sharp gaze, Commander Okamura knelt on the ground decadently, holding the tachi with a cold light in his backhand, finally gritted his teeth and stabbed the tachi into his abdomen. He groaned in pain and fell to the ground, blood flowing down the tachi like a fountain. In Commander Okamura's view, he had provoked an enemy that he shouldn't have provoked, and the fall of the Yodo Air Force Base was his fault. It was a glorious sacrifice to die in Bushido's harakiri. Kale's face was indifferent as he looked at the Air Force commander lying in a pool of blood, as if looking at an ant ending his humble life. Nissan was a bit similar to a country in his previous world. One of the things that made people feel disgusted was their arrogance. They believed that they were superior to others and worshipped the Bushido spirit. Kyle felt that since it was rare for him to come here, he had to teach Ri-Sang a lesson about what it meant to be truly invincible. "I won't kill you." Kale glanced at the sergeants and correspondents on the ground and said in a commanding tone, "Take the commander's body away and tell your emperor that I will be coming to visit soon." The sergeants and correspondents breathed a sigh of relief. The two of them quickly stepped forward, each holding Commander Okamura's hands and feet, and quickly left the office. "Oh right, take this." Kale suddenly thought of something. With a wave of his hand, a card was firmly nailed to the chest of the commander's body. On the back of the card was a black image of a demon grinning. It wasn't the national emblem of the United States, nor was it the symbol of the United States military. It was just a demon card that represented his position. He wanted to rely on himself to shake the entire Nissan country. This sentence was never a joke, it was a reality that was about to be recorded in history. After the two Japanese soldiers left with the body, Kale left the commander's office. At this moment, the base outside was ablaze. Countless buildings were burning and the fire was about to spread to the command building inside the base. On the vast ground, the corpses of countless soldiers were also swallowed up by the tongues of fire. Blood and fire reflected each other, burning the night sky until it was completely red and miserable. The Air Force Base seemed to have been baptized by disaster. It was a scene of devastation. There was a saying in the Soviet Union that was very appropriate to describe Kale: wherever he goes, there is war, disaster, and death. He is the apostle of hell, the incarnation of the devil, a hero in the eyes of others. Kale sped up and quickly passed through the collapsed buildings. He approached the apron at the end of the Air Force Base. There were many blue-grade Japanese fighter jets parked there. It would be a pity if he didn't take them away. Chapter 102. It was late at night, it was close to the dawn of the second day. The Nissan Air Force Base was abruptly engulfed in a raging fire that spread out without any signs of stopping. By the time the rescue team reacted to put out the fire and rescue, the fire had spread out for several kilometers with the base as the center. That night, countless people living in Tokyo were awakened by the noise and looked out of the house. No matter how far or near they were, they could see the fire rising into the sky from one side of the sky. The night sky was burned red like blood by the fire. It was as if the sky was angry and wanted to punish them. In the emperor's mansion, the current emperor of World War II was naturally awakened by his subordinates. He got up from the collapsed bed in confusion and put on a noble Japanese robe with sleepy eyes. He arrived at the conference hall in a hurry. When he arrived at the meeting hall with his head still in a daze, he saw the bright fire in the courtyard outside the door and listened to the frontline report from a group of senior officers about the main Air Force base. His whole body trembled in shock and completely sobered up. The emperor was doubting his life. He leaned against the door and looked back with his eyes wide open at an officer who was silent with his head lowered. He asked loudly, "What did you say?" "Say it again." The officer replied with a trembling voice, "Your Majesty. The Air Force Base was attacked by the American Emperor Kale just now and it has all fallen into a sea of fire. Now all the fire troops in Tokyo have gathered to prevent the fire from spreading." American Emperor Kale? Is he a monster? How did a person invade the Air Force Base? The emperor muttered to himself in disbelief. According to the surviving correspondents in the base, he might really be the incarnation of a monster. Bullets are completely ineffective on him, and cannonballs can't kill him either. Our soldiers, on the other hand, will be easily killed in a single exchange. The officer clenched his teeth and took out a blood-stained devil card from his pocket. He forced Commander Okamura to commit suicide in the Air Force Base and left this devil card behind. He also said, the emperor looked at the officer's hesitant face and could not help but ask, "What else did he say?" "He said that he will visit you in a few days and ask for your advice on the way of the Bushido." As soon as the officer's words left his mouth, the faces of the senior officials in the hall changed. The emperor's face was gloomy as he leaned against the door. If it was not for his subordinates who came forward to support him, he would have sat on the floor directly. "Your Majesty, calm down. You are the god of the country. How can you be afraid of a mere invader in your own territory?" The subordinate who was supporting the emperor reminded him in a low voice. "You're right, you're right." The emperor quickly nodded and forced himself to calm down. He solemnly looked at the cabinet officials and warlord officers in the hall and asked, "What do you think? How should we deal with the invaders from the United States?" The representative of the warlords, Commander Sasaki, who was in charge of the Nissan Army General Base, snorted coldly and spoke first, "What do you mean by, can't be killed?" It's most likely an excuse by the surviving soldiers to cover up their failure to defend the base and demonize the invaders. He said coldly, "Your Majesty, I suggest that we mobilize half of the armed forces stationed in Tokyo to conduct a detailed search of the entire Nissan region of Tokyo. Once we find American Emperor Kale, we will immediately surround and kill him." The representative of the cabinet, Prime Minister Tanaka, frowned and agreed, "That's right. We are a country of samurai. No matter how strong someone is, how can they be stronger than our samurai? While the armed forces are searching the entire Tokyo, Your Majesty, it's best that you hold a meeting tomorrow and personally appease the ordinary people of Tokyo. You must let them believe that we have the ability and confidence to kill the invaders." Commander Sasaki added, "As for the news of the air base being invaded and falling, even if the people of Tokyo know about it, we can only control it within the boundaries of Tokyo. We must not spread it out and let the enemy see us as a joke. The two big shots who held the real power of the country had spoken. The rest of the higher-ups naturally seconded the suggestion. The emperor secretly cursed at the old fox, but could only agree on the surface. Tonight was destined to be a sleepless night for everyone in Tokyo Nissan. And this was only the beginning of the prelude. The real show had yet to begin. The next morning, America's Kyle has attacked the main Air Force base and turned it into a scorched land. This news was too important. It was like throwing a mine into a fish pond. No matter how the higher-ups tried to control and appease, the relevant comments and information still spread like wildfire. Unkillable monster, American Emperor Devil, the war maniac who dominates Frankfurt. Within a few hours, almost all the people in Tokyo Nissan were discussing such topics in panic. The name, American Emperor Kale, lingered in everyone's heart like a nightmare fog. The emperor had no choice but to appear in the emperor's mansion, which had been strengthened by 5 times, and make a speech in the name of God, stating that the invaders would be dealt with as soon as possible, in order to forcibly appease the emotions of the people of Tokyo. The ordinary people were terrified, and the armed soldiers carefully searched the city. On the other hand, some of the pretentious samurai ronin in Nissan were eager to make a move. They rushed to Tokyo excitedly, wanting to take this opportunity to kill Kale and become famous. At the same time, Tokyo, Kurabai District, Shinto Intentionless Schools Dojo. Kale, who was slightly disguised in Venom's appearance, arrived at the road in front of the dojo and stopped, looking up slightly. The kendo dojo in front of him covered a wide area, with more than a dozen Nissan buildings stacked on top of each other. The main dojo was as large as a modern gymnasium and could accommodate almost 1,000 people to practice kendo together. Kale stood straight on the road, coldly glancing at the magnificent kendo dojo, and a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Nissan Samurai Dojo. The origin can't be traced back to when, but it was popularized in the Edo period, when the shogunate recruited samurai, and the samurai respected the spirit. Nissan samurai majored in kendo, which was the killing technique. Later, although the shogunate was overthrown and the New Deal had the abolition of the sword, the successor samurai of Nissan still advocated the practice of kendo. They believed that kendo matched the samurai, and the strong samurai were invincible. This situation has continued to this day. Dozens of different kendo schools were passed down, and the main body was basically settled in the most prosperous city of Nissan, Tokyo. When the soldiers of Nippon Army were young, they were also taught by the dojo. In a sense, these kendo schools were the cornerstone of authority that could represent Samurai Dojo, and they were also the spiritual pillars that Nissan samurai believed to be superior to others. The Emperor of Japan, Nissan's top officials, and the armed soldiers of the military base were carefully guarding against surprise attacks. But they didn't expect that Kale's goal had temporarily changed. He wanted to trample and destroy Nissan's Samurai Dojo first. Chapter 103. The Kendo Dojo is not open to the public recently, please don't come near. Who's there? Do you have an invitation? When Kale approached the magnificent main entrance of the Kendo Dojo, his black battle suit was particularly eye-catching. The 2 young men in white kimonos with wooden long swords guarding the entrance took a step forward and raised their hands to block him as they alerted him. Tell your dojo master. Kale smiled faintly and did not stop walking up the steps as he said calmly, tell him. Kale from the United States is here to challenge him. Kale from the United States? The 2 young men sucked in a breath of cold air and looked at each other. Both of their faces were full of horror. After all, he was the man who caused the entire Tokyo to experience a magnitude 10 earthquake in just one night, causing the entire country to panic as if they were facing a formidable enemy. He was the man who was said to be the devil. The Emperor of Nissan had publicly condemned his crime last night in his mansion, and countless armed soldiers were conducting a comprehensive search in the Tokyo city. In the end, such an uninvited guest came to their kendo dojo? Kale maintained a calm pace. Every time he took a step forward, the two young men would take a few steps back. By the time he reached the main entrance, the guards had already rushed into the dojo in a panic and exclaimed as they walked. "It's Kale from the United States. He's here. The devil who destroyed the Air Force base and threatened the Emperor last night has come to us. Somebody, come quick." In just a short while, dozens of young men dressed as swordsmanship disciples rushed out of the dojo with sharp swords and wooden clogs in their hands. However, when they rushed to within 3 meters of Kale, they collectively stopped in their tracks. Their faces were solemn and vigilant, and they did not dare to approach closer. Those who were holding swords maintained a safe distance. Kale did not even look at them as he walked indifferently and calmly. Just like that, he moved around the sword-wielding crowd and soon stepped into the main hall of the main dojo. More and more sword art disciples gathered around, from dozens to hundreds. They surrounded Kale from both inside and outside, but no one made a move. Fortunately, the hall of the dojo was spacious enough to accommodate hundreds of people practicing swordsmanship at the same time. The wooden floor was as clean as new, and the inner walls were equipped with shelves for practicing wooden swords. In the middle was a huge plaque written in ink. Divine Tao thought less school as one of the cornerstones of Bushido, Shinto Ninen Ryu, which mastered high-end swordsmanship, could be ranked in the top 10 of the kendo schools passed down by Nissan. Although it was not the strongest in the industry, it was the authority of the kendo school with the most disciples. Now that it was a time of war, there were more than 100 inner disciples in the dojo. "Get out of the way and let the challenger in." Surrounded by a group of people, Kale walked into the hall of the dojo. Before he could take a closer look at the situation inside, an old but vigorous voice came from the hall. Hundreds of sword art disciples dressed in white kimono heard the voice and respectfully and silently dispersed, leaving enough spacious and ample space. At this time, Kale finally saw the scene inside. He saw an old man in a kendo suit sitting in the center of the floor of the main hall, and a beautiful woman in a kimono sitting on the side. "You are the current kendo dojo master of the Divine Tao Thought Less School?" Kale bowed his head and looked down, obviously showing a disappointed expression, which made the surrounding hundreds of sword art disciples angry. This intruder was really too rampant. Who in Tokyo Nissan did not know the sword elder, old but not old, a grandmaster of swordsmanship? Even if 10 adult youths came forward, they would be easily put down by him with a wooden sword. Guest came from afar, is it really for the challenge? The sword elder did not have the slightest anger, with the demeanor of a grandmaster, asked softly. "Very simple, today I want to erase the name of the Divine Tao Thought Less School. Of course, you are only the first, Nissan Tokyo has more than 40 Bushido schools, I will also eliminate them." Kale said with a shrug, as if doing a very easy and ordinary thing. "Guest's murderous aura is very strong, and your tone is also not small." The sword elder waved his hand, and the woman next to him understood his meaning. She elegantly got up and took a scabbard tachi from the shelf below the plaque, and sent it to his side. Kale did not stop her, he wanted to see the level of swordsmanship that Nissan praised and passed down. The sword elder slowly got up, and the sharp tachi was unsheathed, shining with cold light. He pointed it at Kale, "You are an outsider who invaded our country, a challenger of the dojo. First you threatened the emperor, and now you want to destroy the sword art school that has been passed down for hundreds of years. Since you came, don't think about leaving here." Kale did not hear the threat, as he swept his eyes over the 100 sword art disciples, and suggested, "Why don't you all come at me together?" The sword elder paused, both of his hands clenched the tachi's hilt, and his slender deep eyes carried a cold light. "Are you looking down on me?" Kale shook his head, and explained, "I am not just looking down on you, I am looking down on everyone here." When these words were said, the 100 sword art disciples in the hall were so angry that they almost rushed over with their swords. The reason they did not rush out was because the sword elder could not help but make a move. The sword elder could only be seen sprinting forward. His speed was even faster than a healthy youth's. When he was 3 meters away from Kale, he leaped forward. While he was in the air, he raised both of his hands, and fiercely chopped down with his tachi. The sharp blade drew a semicircle, and he wanted to cut Kale from the top of his head down into 2 halves. The sword elder's speed was too fast, and the smooth movement of his sword was even more neat, which made all of the disciples in the hall cry out in excitement. The kimono woman also had a smile on her face. Indeed. Kale did not move at all, as if he was scared stiff by the sword elder's sword attack, and did not have any intention of dodging the tachi. The sword art disciples watched, and in their minds they could almost imagine the scene of the opponent's body being cut into 2 halves, and the blood and organs spilling onto the ground. Under everyone's expectant gaze, the sword elder's tachi chopped down with a cold light, and at the moment before it touched Kale's body, his right hand shot out like lightning, and his thumb and index finger pinched the tip of the sword. The tachi fell on the vibranium arm guard and the venom vest's right hand, but there was not even a single sound. The incomparably sharp chopping just a second ago, was strangely and steadily stopped. Empty-handed tachi? No, this was a scene that surpassed thousands of techniques. The sword art disciples were all stunned, and the hall was so silent that you could hear a pin drop. The one who was even more shocked was the sword elder. He looked incredulously at the right hand that caught his tachi, and with shame and fear, he tightly gripped the hilt of his sword. He used all of his strength, but he was still unable to pull the tachi away from Kale's hand. How did you do it? The sword elder let go of the tachi in horror. It must be known that he had practiced high-speed chopping for dozens of years, and could even easily chop down a big tree, but now he was unable to shake the man in front of him. A frog at the bottom of a well. Kale indifferently said in Japanese. He already understood that the so-called sword elder only had a rare green ability card, true divine way of the void swordsmanship mastery. Moreover, in the 3 seconds that he spoke, he had already taken the card from the sword elder's body. It's my turn. Kale whispered, and punched out with his right fist. The fist carried a strong wind pressure, and it quickly fell on the sword elder's thin body. A fist that was 12 times stronger than a human's. Bang! Chapter 104. Bam! The plaque on the inner wall of the dojo was stained with blood. The sword elder's body, which had suffered a fatal blow, fell to the floor without any signs of life. The hall was dead silent. Hundreds of sword disciples opened their mouths wide in shock. Sadness, anger, hatred, shock, and fear were all displayed on their faces. Kale's expression was indifferent. He calmly withdrew his clenched left hand. His right hand, which was wearing a vibrating gold arm guard, was still holding the tip of the katana. His techniques were all low-grade, only the mutation was high. This world's evolution branch was so unsolvable. Strength, speed, reflexes, physical strength, and so on were all beyond crushing. Even if one's swordsmanship was unparalleled, without the use of strange energy, how could an ordinary person's body withstand his full-strength punch after genetic mutation? Only the world's hidden magic, the alien race's talent, and the future black technology of the 21st century might be able to surpass his current mutation and evolution progress. The Alpha Centauri's mage organization was aimed at protecting the Earth. The Black Panther Nation was in seclusion. The invasion of the outer space races and gods had not yet arrived. The 21st century was still more than 50 years away. When the tiger is absent, the monkey will be king. In this World War II era, Kale dared to act arrogantly and challenge anyone who was not convinced. In the hall of the dojo, the kimono woman stared blankly at the tragic death of the sword elder. Her beautiful eyes were filled with hatred and resentment. She suddenly snatched the sword from the hands of a sword disciple beside her and rushed crazily towards Kale. Kale turned around indifferently. He flicked his right wrist and the katana in his hand shot out. It quickly pierced through the woman's chest. The hilt went straight into her body and dragged her back until she was nailed to the door of the hall. Sword elder. Senior sister. The remaining hundreds of sword disciples in the dojo were furious. They could no longer hold back the grief and anger in their hearts. They held their swords and rushed towards Kale in the middle of the hall. Wouldn't it have been fine if you had all attacked together? Kale shrugged. The liquid black silk of the venom suit formed a protective hood around his neck. His scarlet eyes flashed like a mask. His clenched fists each stretched out faint dark claws. Venom completely covered state. Claw mode. Kale squatted with both of his feet and charged forward. His body was like a body of steel as he charged forward. The hundreds of young men who were holding swords in their hands had their formation broken apart by the violent and barbaric charge. The few people who were at the front were even sent flying out of the door while coughing out blood. Kare's feet accelerated, and his sharp claws didn't stop slashing and tearing. Every strike caused blood to splatter, and several young men fell to the ground, howling in pain. The swordsman disciple attacked him without fear of death. Most of the slashes fell on his body, unable to break through the tough protective coat of the venom suit. Even if the powerful sword strike barely broke through the venom suit and cut a thin and long blood mark on the surface of the skin below, the small wound was completely healed before blood could flow out. It didn't look like hundreds of people attacking one person. Instead, it looked more like a lion or tiger charging into a flock of sheep. Kale transformed into a war machine called Slaughter, constantly harvesting the weak lives. By the time the dojo hall fell into a long silence again, Kale panted heavily and walked out of the courtyard with bloody footprints. The bright sunlight fell on his demon-like dark red appearance, but it still turned cold. Venom quickly disguised himself as a Nissan and returned to his identity as a passerby. He leisurely left the swordsman dojo that was filled with the smell of blood and fuel. 3 minutes later, the main dojo of Divine Tao's Zero-Thought Sword sect suddenly caught fire. The fire was so serious that it spread uncontrollably to more than a dozen swordsman dojo buildings inside. The raging flames devoured everything in the swordsman dojo, as well as the foundation of Divine Tao's Zero-Thought Sword sect that had hundreds of years of history. Tokyo, the Heavenly Emperor's mansion. The Heavenly Emperor, dressed in a gorgeous and noble robe, was standing on the altar of the mansion, giving a speech and statement to nearly 1,000 people in the courtyard. His face was majestic, and it was full of a peaceful aura under the contrast of the robe. He looked down at the people like a noble god. The demon from the United States took advantage of the empty air base and committed a heinous crime, but he will soon be punished by the military warriors under the protection of the gods. Everyone must believe in us, we have the ability and confidence. Looking at the people below who firmly believed in him, the emperor maintained a faint smile on his face. Just as he was about to finish the rest of his speech, one of his subordinates suddenly walked up to the platform, causing him to be unable to help but stop talking. The Heavenly Emperor frowned unhappily, but when his men approached him and whispered a few words in a hurry in his ear, his face suddenly changed. Well, let's call it a day. The Heavenly Emperor's face was pale, and he casually finished with a few words before leaving the altar with the help of his men. Below the altar, the people who were listening with relish and relaxed were slightly stunned. They looked at each other and began to discuss, not knowing what had happened. The kendo dojo of the Shinto Wunyen, was it really all destroyed in a fire? Returning to the inner room of the Heavenly Emperor mansion, the Heavenly Emperor took a deep breath and asked with difficulty. The fire spread too fast. When the fire brigade arrived, more than a dozen dojo buildings were already burned. We were at the scene and only found this thing. The man said as he slowly took out a card from his pocket. The black demon on the card was grinning outside. The Heavenly Emperor looked at the card and could no longer remain calm. He knelt on the ground and took the demon card from his man in fear. He also took out the card with the same demon pattern on the back of the card from his own body. The format and pattern of the two demon cards were the same, and the material seemed to be iron metal, so it was not destroyed in the fire. The pattern on the front of the demon card was a square brick and a plum blossom. He is declaring war on our country alone, is he going to play all 54 cards? The Heavenly Emperor said while gritting his teeth. Your Majesty. The man sighed. You go and inform Commander Sasaki, allow him to send out all the armed forces in Nissan Tokyo. We must fight back. The Heavenly Emperor quietly clenched his fists and said coldly after making a decision, also, let the ninja organization protecting the Heavenly Emperor mansion move. My safety is secondary, and killing that man is my primary goal. Your Majesty, you can't. Your safety is the most important thing. The man tried to persuade him. The Heavenly Emperor shook his head and said, no need to say more. When he plays all 54 cards, our Nissan country will not be a country anymore. What's the use of having the Heavenly Emperor and gods? His purpose is actually. The man hesitated and did not continue. We are a strong warrior country. How can we bow down to him? The Heavenly Emperor stared at him and waved his sleeves and said firmly. At this time, Nissan Tokyo Jiangxia district, in front of the main dojo of the Heartless Sword sect. Chapter 105. Within half a day, 11 kendo dojos in Nissan Tokyo were destroyed. Each dojo was forcibly broken into by the same person, killing everyone inside, including the dojo master and all the kendo disciples, and then burning down the foundation of the dojo. Everywhere, a devil card was left behind, as if to announce the identity of the intruder. Devil, Kale. He was like the incarnation of the devil, crushing and uprooting the representative dojo as the cornerstone of samurai, and trampling on the samurai's spiritual support. The people of Nissan Tokyo were shocked again, and while they felt fear for Kale, the intruder, they realized for the first time that the samurai, who was usually extraordinary, was so fragile. Nearly 100,000 armed soldiers went out to search, but Tokyo was too big. It could be subdivided into 4 or 5 large cities. Dozens of famous swordsmanship dojos were scattered in various areas, and it was impossible to control all the military forces to defend. Some strategic analysts from Japan had been trying to figure out Kyle's whereabouts and goals, so they had arranged for their troops to be stationed near these dojos in advance. However, in the next moment, the dojos of other sects that were 10 kilometers away were destroyed. When the army rushed all the way to the scene, only a mess of black charcoal and scorched earth was left behind. They didn't know that with the Blue Eagle scouting at a height of more than a kilometer, it would be difficult for Kale to be surrounded by a large army. After all, people were not machines. Kale, who was in combat mode, consumed much more physical strength than ordinary people, but with the super soldier's physical fitness and self-healing factor, his physical state could be recovered quickly. But once he fell into a large army that was already armed and prepared, it was impossible for him to wipe out the enemy alone, no matter how strong he was. He would consume his physical strength in a prolonged stalemate, and there was no time to relax and rest. And continuous intensive artillery attacks would exceed the limit of the venom protection and the resistance of the mutated body, and the recovery speed of the self-healing factor couldn't keep up with the new injuries, and there was also the possibility of death. Kale had enough understanding of his own strength, so he wouldn't put himself in that kind of life-threatening situation. While he was playing hide-and-seek with the large army in Tokyo, he consecutively destroyed another 5 swordsmanship dojos that were undefended. In total, he had destroyed 16 schools. Nissan had lost so many sects in one go. The last time was in the Edo period 100 years ago. One could imagine how big of a blow this was to the people who prided themselves on being samurai. Commander Sasaki, who was in the command center, was anxious. He sent messengers to the remaining dojos to persuade them to abandon their main dojos and head to a safe area to take refuge. That's right. In the eyes of the country, Kale's threat was no less than a natural disaster. However, the dojo, which represented Bushido, unanimously rejected Commander Sasaki's persuasion. For them, in the face of a powerful enemy, death was not terrible. What was terrible was being afraid before the battle. If they abandoned the main dojo out of fear, wouldn't they be abandoning the samurai spirit in their hearts? As long as the sword is here, the person is here. As long as the person is here, the tavern is here. This was the unanimous reply of the remaining members of the dojos. They felt that they had a lot of backbone. When Commander Sasaki heard about it in the military headquarters, he almost cursed out loud. For the first time, he sighed in his heart, Bushido is harmful. It's too pedantic and stupid. It doesn't know how to be flexible. If the enemy was someone else, it would be fine if there was a chance of winning. But it was Kale. In less than 2 days, the name of the devil shrouded and suppressed the entire Tokyo Nissan. Do we really have to wait until the last few dojos in Tokyo are destroyed before we can gather the army to arrange the defense? Commander Sasaki had a headache. Just as he was thinking about what to do, a communication soldier rushed in excitedly. The communication soldier saluted and said, "Reporting to Sir. We have just received the latest news. The ninja organization protecting the Emperor has left the Emperor's mansion and is secretly operating. They are requesting our cooperation." Ninja? Commander Sasaki was stunned. Then, with a smile on his face, he laughed and said, "It seems that the Emperor can't help it anymore. He even sent out the ninja who has been protecting the Emperor's mansion for a long time." Ninja, that was the elite of the elite, the samurai of the samurai. Every member had power above ordinary people. Unfortunately, this organization only listened to the orders of the Emperor. It was not an armed force under the jurisdiction of the army. Commander Sasaki said coldly, "Cooperate, of course we will cooperate. In this battle, we will use all our firepower and weapons, ignoring public property and civilian casualties. No matter how much we have to pay, we must kill that man in one battle." Nissan, Tokyo, Kanagawa District. This was the border of Tokyo. The buildings on the streets were far less prosperous than the downtown area. Coupled with the invasion of the demons in the United States, there were very few pedestrians on the road. However, there was a dojo that was enough to be ranked in the top 10. It was rumored that the Hojo Itoryu raised the demon sword Murasame. Kale came to the door of the dojo and was surprised to find that there were no guards at the door of the dojo. The main door of the main dojo was also kept wide open. Were the people inside evacuated? Kale didn't care. The people of the dojo stayed to defend or retreated. It didn't make much difference to him. Destroying the dojo and erasing the foundation of the self-proclaimed Bushido was his purpose. Kale's face was expressionless. He returned to the original appearance of the night battle suit and stepped into the main dojo coldly. When he walked into the yard, he found that the people of the dojo had not evacuated. Instead, they were kneeling in a neat row in the main hall. A middle-aged man in a black kimono sat in the front. About 50 black-clothed swordsmanship disciples sat behind him. They all closed their eyes and rested. "You're finally here. We've been waiting for a long time." The middle-aged man opened his eyes and looked at Kale standing straight at the door of the main hall. "Demon Kale, come to challenge." Kale smiled and said his usual opening remarks. "I, Hojo Maru, the 21st dojo master of the Hojo Itoryu." The middle-aged man picked up the scabbard Nissan sword beside him, stood up slowly, and said firmly, "On behalf of the Hojo Itoryu, I accept your challenge." When his voice fell, the 50 swordsmanship disciples behind him also stood up together, holding the swords that had already been prepared, and were ready to fight. Hojo Maru said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "I know that I have no chance of winning against you alone, so our people will fight together. That's how it should be." Kale nodded with satisfaction, and his eyes fell on the Nissan sword in the man's hand. He said with a little interest, "Is the legendary demon sword Cursed Blade in your hand?" "Exactly. Cursed Blade shouldn't be unsheathed. Unfortunately, it's a matter of life and death for the Hojo Itoryu, so I can only use it against the ancestors." Hojo Maru said, holding the scabbard in his left hand and the carefully carved hilt in his right hand. He pulled out the slender cursed blade inch by inch. Kale looked at the so-called demon sword. The hilt of the sword was carved by a master of the art level, and the blade was as bright as a mirror, shining with a cold light. It looked very good. With the level of craftsmanship of the ancient Japanese, it was almost as good as the sodium-carbon steel one-handed sword forged by Howard with high-end technology. Chapter 106. This dojo was different from the previous ones that overestimated themselves or adhered to Bushido. It was like they were very aware of their own weakness and understood the strength of the enemy, so they were determined to fight to the death. Then let's get started. Kale stared seriously and crossed his fists in front of his chest. 6 dark claws protruded sharply, and the venom suit also entered a fully covered combat state. His dark body, which seemed to be born purely for fighting and killing, released a cold and oppressive aura, which was daunting. All the disciples of Hojo Itoryu, listen to my order. We will live and die with the dojo today, and we will fight until the last drop of blood is shed. Hojo Maru shouted, holding the cursed blade in both hands in front of him, and the swordsmanship disciples behind him also pulled out the swords in their hands with the belief of death. Kill! Everyone in the hall of the dojo roared, raised their swords, and rushed forward on their clogs. Come on! Kale smiled coldly and didn't have the slightest intention of evading. He lowered his body and sprinted, choosing to fight head-on in a one versus many fight. He was used to large and small battles, and for him, it was like a habitual thing. Kyle sped up and rushed into the group of warriors, quickly raising his right hand to block in front of him. Suddenly, nearly a dozen swords slashed forward and slashed at the vibranium arm guard. With the characteristic of absorbing external kinetic energy, it easily blocked all the slashes coming at him. He waved his right claw horizontally downward, and several samurai within half a meter in front of him immediately screamed and fell back to the ground while covering their abdomen with blood. This was just the beginning of the bloody battle, and soon other samurai stepped forward to fill the gap. Several Nissan swords fell on Kale's defenseless back, but they didn't break the tough protection of the venom suit. The samurai opened their mouths in horror, and in the next moment, their bodies were torn apart by sharp claws like paper, and minced meat and blood splashed. Kale seemed to be repeating the same battle as before, ignoring the enemy's sword attacks. Even if his body was injured, he didn't care, immersed in this killing like a monster. After nearly 10 samurai died and fell to the ground, Hojo Maru, who was mixed in the battle, finally couldn't help but shout, "Do it!" Surrounded by so many samurai, Kale looked up with his bloodshot eyes. Just as he was about to search for Dojo Master Hojo's figure with his gaze, 2 faint sounds of wind breaking entered his ears. In his field of vision, the 2 dart-shaped concealed weapons were constantly enlarging. They exploded at a speed faster than ordinary bullets and were about to hit his eyes. With the reflex arc of Kale's super soldier, it was too late to dodge this hidden weapon attack that was impossible to guard against. He could only close his eyes quickly, and the dart pierced his eyelids that were protected by venom, giving him a subtle tingling sensation. Now! Hojo Maru and the other 9 samurai, who had been pacing back and forth in the rear of the battlefield and waiting for an opportunity, quickly stepped forward and approached Kale at a speed far greater than before. Their movements were swift and powerful, and the moment they passed by Kale's side, they slashed through the air and broke through Venom's protective skin, leaving 10 thin and long bloody marks on his robust body. He was careless. Kale calmly closed his eyes. He sensed that the last samurai was about to retreat from his shoulder. He quickly reached out his right hand and grabbed that person's calf. He simply dragged the enemy's body up high and slammed him down on the ground with all his strength. OL 6. OL 6. The other 9 samurai who had retreated to a safe distance after the attack exclaimed in surprise. Kale, who was heavily injured, opened his red eyes and looked down at the young samurai who was moaning in pain. He was also dressed in a black kimono from the dojo, but the card abilities he had were far superior to those of the swordsmanship disciples. True assassination mastery, true concealed weapon mastery, true disguise mastery, poison mastery, psychological forbearance mastery. There were more than 20 green ability cards, all of which were based on extreme assassination techniques. Among them, there was a particularly eye-catching blue ability card. Super Ninja Constitution unique to Nissan Samurai, inferior version of Super Soldier. Blue ability card. Through a mixture of various poisons and hormones, it is continuously injected into the samurai's body. After enduring inhuman pain, it forcefully excavates the human body's potential, exchanging the body's lifespan for the Super Ninja Constitution. The genes in the body are unstable, and the cells will no longer age and die, showing the characteristics of a cancer patient. Obtain the top strength, speed, and reaction of a normal human, as well as the limit of a human's physical endurance and resistance. Naturally, the person's lifespan will not exceed 50 years. So, Nissan really does have ninjas. I underestimated you. Kale sneered. His right arm clamped down on the ninja's neck, and he dragged his injured body to stand up. He glanced at the ninja who was clamped down by his arm. The ninja's resistance was not bad. After the violent smash just now, he still had the consciousness to kick his feet in the air and struggle violently. Unfortunately, Kale's super soldier was an upper-level super ninja, and the mutation and evolution were more perfect. The opponent could not move his arm that was full of strength. Boss. The 8 ninjas around disguised as swordsmanship disciples looked at Hojo Maru anxiously, waiting for his instructions. Hojo Maru shook his head indifferently, ignoring the struggling ninja, holding the blood-stained cursed blade Murasame, and looked at Kale coldly. You are not the original owner here. Kale squinted and asked. The original owner died a long time ago. Here are all our ninja organizations and the military disguised people. Hojo Maru said coldly, you have nowhere to run. Put down little 6 in your hand, and I can let you live to see His Majesty the Emperor. Sorry, I never accept threats from others. Kale chuckled, and his right arm was fully contracted, clamping the ninja's neck. The ninja struggled a little, and his limbs were hanging down after his neck was broken. He loosened his right arm protected by the vibrating metal arm guard and threw the ninja's body on the floor. You! The other 8 ninjas shouted angrily, but the next scene made them open their eyes in horror. They saw Kale standing tall and straight, and the large and small wounds on his body were quickly healing, which looked very strange. Hojo Maru, the leader of the ninja team, said as if he had expected it, sure enough, as the surviving soldiers of the army said, what a strong self-healing ability. Kale frowned slightly. Something was wrong. The other party had long known that he had a strong self-healing ability. How could he stop the attack after a blow and let him delay the recovery time? He suddenly realized that his body was strange. He touched his back with his left hand. The cut caused by Hojo Maru on his back did not show signs of self-healing, and blood continued to gush out. Chapter 107. Cursed Blade Murasame, mixed with sodium carbon steel metal, a Nissan blade made with ultra-high level of craftsmanship. Blue item card. The amount of sodium carbon steel mixed in it is enough to play a special effect, that is, tough and sharp, and can inhibit the healing factor of the human body, causing permanent trauma. After a long baptism of blood, the blade has a faint dark red color and a bloody smell. Kale looked at the nearby cursed blade Murasame held by Hojo Maru, and the item card information revealed on it, and he suddenly understood. The so-called bleeding cursed blade is actually a handmade Nissan blade with sodium carbon steel components. No wonder the cut left on his back couldn't be healed in a short time even with the self-healing factor. Kale was injured on his back, but he remained calm and stood in place, guarding against the remaining 9 ninjas around him. The extraordinary physique of a super ninja, coupled with the insidious hidden weapon that is impossible to guard against, it will be disadvantageous for him if he drags on. He can fight, but it's not necessary. Chirp. When the atmosphere in the hall was still in a deadlock, a loud eagle cry came from the distant sky outside the dojo, and the sound wave with its own penetrating power echoed clearly in the room. The ninjas in the dojo thought it was just an ordinary eagle and didn't care, and continued to lock Kale's body with solemn and serious eyes. Kale heard the familiar cry of the eagle outside, and his face under the hood of the venom suit changed slightly. This is a warning signal, and with this volume, it proves that there is an enemy air fighter team or a large army coming this way. It seems that I can't stay any longer. Kale quietly made up his mind and glanced around with cold eyes. At this time, Hojo Maru showed a mysterious smile again. Your physique is really comparable to a monster, and you can hold on for so long. It's just a cut. Kale frowned and stopped talking halfway. He noticed that the nerves in his body were attacked by something, and his body trembled uncontrollably. He bent down and finally could barely support himself on the floor with his claws. Our weapons are coated with paralyzing poison when they are sharpened. The amount you ingested should be enough to paralyze an adult elephant for 3 days and 3 nights. After Hojo Maru's confident explanation, Kale's eyelids sank, and his hands fell weakly to the ground, and he lost consciousness. He succeeded. The other 8 ninjas saw this scene and breathed a sigh of relief. The oppressive feeling of the man in front of them was too strong, far more than any enemy they had ever encountered. As long as he was still standing there, no one dared to approach him. According to the amount of paralyzing poison in his body, there is no doubt that it has succeeded. Hojo Maru said coldly, but he didn't let his guard down. He ordered, Small 1 and Small 2, you two go and take a look. The 2 ninjas in the team looked at each other and nodded. One on the left and one on the right, they approached the unconscious Kale. 5 meters, 3 meters, 1 meter, the 2 of them cautiously approached Kale until they were only half a meter away from him. When they discovered that he still didn't have any reaction or awareness, they were just about to breathe a sigh of relief when they suddenly heard Hojo Maru's urgent warning. Be careful. The 2 ninjas instinctively wanted to retreat, but Kale, who was lying on the ground, suddenly flipped over and raised his hands, aiming 2 energy pistols at their chests. Bye-bye. Kale sneered and quickly pulled the trigger. At such a close distance, they could only see 2 bright blue lasers coming out of the barrel. Immediately afterward, the 2 active ninjas, under the gaze of everyone in the hall, were pierced by the lasers and opened a bloody hole in their bodies. They died on the spot and fell into a pool of blood. Small 1 and Small 2. Hojo Maru shouted in shock and anger, and a blue laser shot toward him. He reacted quickly and waved the Murasame, and the laser was smashed in front of him, and a little blue light splashed. But then, several blue lasers followed one after another, as if they were not targeting the other ninja members, but the focus of the attack was focused on him. Baka! Hojo Maru, who had always been calm, couldn't help but curse at this time, and quickly rolled to avoid the laser shooting. However, Kale, as a sharpshooter, predicted the shooting position in advance, so that after rolling a few times, a laser still rushed to Hojo Maru's body. Hojo Maru shouted and hurriedly raised the Murasame to block. The power in his hand was not condensed, and the laser was barely defended with the blade. The impact shook the Murasame out of his hand and flew up. He got up and wanted to catch the Murasame in the air with his hand, but a black figure quickly leaped and caught the hilt of the Murasame first. Looking at Kale, who was close to him, Hojo Maru's pupils contracted, and his eyes were dim and showed a desperate look. Forcing me to use the energy pistol, an extinct black technology consumable, it's a bit interesting. Kale whispered and fell from the air, and the Murasame in his left hand quickly chopped down. This is a chop for you. In Hojo Maru's tragic scream, an arm flew high from his body with blood. This was the result of the crooked chop. Kale raised the Murasame and wanted to finish the chop, but he staggered and almost fell to the ground. He ignored the rest of the ninjas and rushed out of the hall alone. Boss! The remaining 6 ninjas shouted, and all of them quickly approached Hojo Maru, who was covering the broken arm. Hojo Maru's face was pale and collapsed to the ground, his forehead was full of cold sweat. He gritted his teeth and endured the pain of the broken arm, and said hoarsely, "Don't worry about me, go after the demon Kale. He has been injured, and the poison paralyzes the nerves, his body is already at the end of its flight. Go, don't let him run away." "Got it. We will complete the task." The ninjas growled and followed the blood to the outside of the hall. Kale gasped, holding the Murasame in one hand and the energy pistol in the other, walked from the main hall to the yard, and almost fell into the small pool. His current situation was very bad. The paralyzing nerve poison ingested in the body was hindering the normal operation of the body and nerves, and some parts of the body began to lose feeling and motor functions. Fortunately, the self-healing factor was suppressed, but once the high-load exercise started, the paralyzing nerve poison would spread all over the body with the blood. Just now, he was able to fall down and kill the ninjas, all because of the word, stubbornness. "Venom, once I completely lose consciousness, you control my body and escape to a safe place." Kale whispered, although there were still life-saving skills and cards that had not been used, he had already prepared for the worst of this battle. "He's there, don't let him run away." 6 ninjas came out of the main hall, and after seeing Kale, they approached him quickly. Kale gritted his teeth and rushed to the main gate of the dojo. The moment his front foot stepped out, a dangerous breath came to his heart, driving him to take back his foot. The next moment, a shell landed at the gate of the dojo, which was right in front of Kale. Under the explosion of fire, gravel dust and blast waves swept away. Kale rolled a few times on the ground of the yard, and when he got up from the ground with dust all over his head, he was bombarded by a series of dense rocket launcher shells. The main gate of the dojo and the walls on both sides were completely flattened. Chapter 108. This was an exceptionally spectacular and shocking scene. There were ninjas chasing behind, and thousands of Japanese armed soldiers set up a line of defense in front. Countless pairs of hostile eyes and gun muzzles were focused on one person. This is really not good. Kale in the courtyard of the dojo smiled bitterly. The original Murasame and energy pistol had been turned into cards and returned to the card space. His 2 hands were weak and hanging down, as if he had lost the thought of resistance and escape. "Demon Kale, you have no way to escape, surrender." An officer stood in the safe enough area of the large army outside and persuaded loudly. The ninjas who chased out and stopped frowned and said coldly, "Don't. This demon's means are strange and changeable, please shoot him on the spot." "But..." The officer hesitated, which made Kale shrugged helplessly and said, "Come on, do I look like I'm at your disposal?" While he was talking, he suddenly pulled out a blue item card from his hand and held it between his 2 fingers. Some of his trump cards haven't been used yet. Trying to delay for a few seconds was just to wait for the opportunity to escape. Now, it should be almost there, Kale said in his heart. The open space where he stood was covered by clouds and cast a large shadow. The armed soldiers around seemed to have discovered something in horror, and some of them looked up to the sky in confusion. "What is that, a monster? What a big goshawk, and its blue feathers. It seems to be approaching here." The officer also raised his head. When he saw the huge blue eagle swooping close to the dojo courtyard, he seemed to realize something and exclaimed, "Not good, all of you, open fire. It's too late." Kale shook his head gently, and a powerful energy tide burst out from the soles of his feet. The invisible force pushed his body into the sky like a rocket. Air sprint. Boom, da-da-da. The intensive artillery fire was less than half a second late and fell on the place where there was still white air waves, crushing a large amount of gravel and soil into powder. Chirp! The blue eagle swooped down and arrived at the low altitude of the courtyard. It perfectly caught Kale, who sprinted to the highest point with its claws. It opened its huge wings of 10 meters and fiercely flapped. A few rocket launchers that were hastily fired from below were directly blown away by the fierce wind and exploded at a low altitude beside it. The Blue Eagle let out a high-pitched cry as it rushed out of the smoke and flames of the explosion. It flapped its wings in the air, increasing its speed as it carried Kyle into the midday sky. "Where is the fighter? You must stop that monster for me." The officer stared at the Blue Eagle that was about to disappear into the distance and yelled at the radio operator beside him. At this moment, a small black object fell from the Blue Eagle and smashed into the open space in front of the dojo. It was a small black ball with a green light, and it was still rolling on the ground. "What is that?" The group of armed soldiers at the front instinctively retreated. No matter how they looked at it, it looked like a grenade. But which country's grenade didn't explode after falling from the sky for so long? Is it a mute? The officer looked at the round object 10 meters away. The green light continued to flash like a countdown and soon turned red. Then, there was no more. Beep beep. The round object exploded into an existence similar to a black hole and began to devour everything inside. In the blink of an eye, it rapidly expanded from the size of a fist to a huge sphere with a radius of 50 meters. Everything inside, including the ninjas, the armed soldiers, the buildings, the streets, the trees, the rocks, and even the existence of sound and light were all swallowed up. When the area regained its source of sound and light, the black hole gradually dissipated and the bright sun shone again. The scene inside Tokyo's Kanagawa district was a huge, smooth, semicircular hole in the ground with the original building as the center. Tokyo's border, thousands of meters above the sky. Kale, who was in the claws of the Blue Eagle, naturally did not know the consequences of the alien bomb. He was a little confused now, and more than half of his body was paralyzed and unable to move. Kale struggled to open his eyes, trying to find a safe place. Unexpectedly, he saw the clouds behind the Blue Eagle tearing apart, and more than a dozen single-person fighter jets were approaching at full speed. Is there an end to this? Kale had no strength to complain. His mind was muddled, and his willpower and strength were fading. He wanted to sleep. The Blue Eagle cried anxiously. Under the pursuit of more than a dozen fighter jets, it grabbed Kale and fled at supersonic speed. 10 minutes later. Kale lost the feeling of strong claws grabbing his body. The cold wind blew from below. He realized that he was in a natural state of falling. What happened to the Blue Eagle? Kale squinted his eyes. Through the gap, he could see the Blue Eagle rushing into the distance and the fighter jets chasing after it. His consciousness fell asleep again. He lost control of his body and fell straight down to the huge snow mountain below. Kale didn't know how long he had slept before he gradually woke up. When he woke up, he found himself in a cave. There were caves and tunnels everywhere, and there was a hot spring next to him. "Venom, what's going on?" Kale whispered. He was still wearing the Venom suit. It should be Venom's credit that he could suddenly come here after falling from a high altitude. Venom proudly conveyed his thoughts to him. After a while, Kale understood the current situation. No wonder he was hungry. It turned out that 3 days had passed since the last battle. When falling down the snow mountain, Venom spread out his gliding wings and landed, and then controlled his body to hide in the cave under the snow mountain. "Fortunately, I have you." Kale breathed a sigh of relief. After sleeping for 3 days, not to mention the nerve paralysis poison, even the cut on his back had healed. He took off the Venom suit and took out various hot and fresh food stored as item cards from the card space. While quickly eating to replenish his strength, he jumped naked into the hot spring next to him. Comfortable. Kale sighed. The temperature of the hot spring was just right, and it greatly eased the tension caused by the battle. That's right, this place is comfortable and safe. Kale thought of something and pulled out a rare blue creature card from the card space. Under the physical summon, an oval-shaped egg followed and soaked in the hot spring. Unhatched egg, current status, in the current environment. Time left to hatch, 33 years, 9 months, and 7 days. Kale, you're a good sleeper, brother egg. 30 years, I think I'll have a son by now. Kale shook his head. After filling his stomach and washing his body, he put on his underwear and Venom's suit to recover to his peak state. He followed Venom's instructions and wanted to leave the cave the way he came. After taking a few steps, he unexpectedly heard subtle footsteps in the naturally formed tunnel next to him. There are people here. Chapter 109. Inside the cave tunnel. Similar to the underground research guards, they were also holding Japanese-style guns in their hands, carefully inspecting left and right. After Kale saw that there were no accomplices behind the person, he quietly exited from the camouflage mode, rushed to the side of the person, and hit the back of the person's neck. The researcher's eyes rolled back, his body went soft, and he lost consciousness and collapsed to the ground. He didn't kill him because he had other uses. Venom, it's up to you. Kale patted the battle suit on his body with his hand, and Venom stretched out a black tentacle and spun in the air. The tip of the tentacle pierced into the back of the researcher's head. In less than 10 seconds, Venom searched through the researcher's memory, captured some information fragments, and indirectly fed it back to him through telepathy. Kyle's heart skipped a beat, as if he had just heard something unbelievable. He looked at a cave tunnel in the mountain in shock. There was a hidden underground research institute here, where almost all of Nissan's top biological scientists were gathered, and they were creating a special human called Holy Son under the order of the Emperor. Venom didn't know the specific details, what it searched for was only general information, and it became more abstract after telepathy. Kale was silent for a moment, and let Venom disguise the appearance of the battle suit into a full set of protective clothing including a gas mask, a white coat, plastic gloves, and long boots. He then took the guns and documents from the research guard's body, and walked to the location of the Underground Research Institute. In any case, he was slightly concerned about the special human being that was mentioned. Kale followed the direction indicated by Venom. There were several naturally formed cave tunnels, and there was a man-made one in the depths. When he reached the dead end, under the identity check equivalent to a pass, the wall opened to reveal the internal elevator. After the elevator went down 50 meters, Kale arrived at the destination, and a dazzling light lit up in front of him. The huge basement was brightly lit under the lights. All kinds of advanced scientific research equipment and glassware were lined up. More than 20 researchers in white lab coats were working hard. Quick! See what's wrong with the data, 2 more Holy Son test subjects died just now. Sigh, it's K-268 and K-269. Currently, only Holy Son K-208 is still alive. Sadly, it's not perfect yet. However, the radiation gene should be the one closest to its stable value now. Several biologists, ranging in age from 80 to 30, gathered together to discuss. Kale, pretending to be a guard, passed through the basement hall. No one looked at him. Their attention was focused on the data sheet and the test at hand. Kale's path was unobstructed as he walked to the innermost single rooms. He walked towards one of them as if he had a purpose in mind. In front of the isolation room, there was an exclusive guard watching over it. When he saw Kale approaching, he immediately said warily, "What's your number? Don't come near here without permission." Before he could finish his words, his mouth was suddenly covered by Kale's right hand. Kale lifted his body and slammed his head against the iron door, causing him to faint. Kale picked up the key from the guard and opened the isolation room. As soon as he opened the door, a strong smell of disinfectant assaulted his nose. Closing the door behind him, Kale walked into the room and looked up. Everything in the isolation room was reflected in his eyes. In the room that was neither big nor small, under the combination of scientific and medical equipment, there was a huge cylindrical glass tank. It was filled with a translucent liquid. Several small pipes intertwined with each other, and in the middle of it was a black-haired girl of about 7 or 8 years old. The girl's petite body was naked as if she was in a dormant state. She curled up into a ball like a cat. Her white and tender body made her look like a porcelain doll. This is the perfect result of the research? Kale frowned. He walked in front of the glass tank and pressed his left hand on the glass wall. This distance was enough for him to detect other people's cards. Sure enough, an ability card was suspended above the girl's body. Yes, there was no other white or green ability card. There was only one, dark blue card. Telekinesis, a genetic mutant's talent, telekinesis. Rare blue ability card. Mental power is 10 times stronger than normal humans. It also has the ability to quickly learn, quickly recognize, and control specific objects to move through space. The telekinesis effect is related to the distance and weight of the controlled object, as well as the strength of the controlled creature's will. Current status, ability is unstable. Unable to draw, rare blue prefix. The Nissan people are actually creating mutants. Kale opened his eyes wide in disbelief. He looked at the talent card that was similar to Logan's. It was also a genetic mutant's talent card. Currently, it was the big universe environment of Marvel's The Avengers movie. Unlike the other series of mutants in the X-Men universe, this world was full of mutations, technology, magic, and alien myths. There were very few natural mutants. Hulk and Spider-Man were both later mutations, Black Panther was an inheritance. Those who really appeared in the movie were only the later Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, and so on. They were considered pure mutants. And here, there was one. Unfortunately, the signs of life are too weak. It's a semi-finished product. Kale was a little regretful. The medical instrument next to the glass tank clearly showed the mutant girl's heartbeat characteristics. The arc of the electric wave bouncing almost became a horizontal line. After all, the biological and technological level was limited. Although the mutants were created, their vitality was very weak. They could only rely on the nutrient solution to survive in a vegetative state. Once out of the experimental tank, it was estimated that they would not live for more than 3 minutes in the outside world. Worthless. Kale shook his head and turned to leave. He just walked to the door when suddenly a weak voice came into his mind. "Help me dash," Kale's body stiffened. He turned and looked at the little girl in the glass tank. The other party was still floating motionlessly in the nutrient solution. Illusion? It was not an illusion. Do you want to be free? Then I'll help you. Kale smiled and walked into the glass tank again. His right hand, protected by the vibranium arm guard, clenched into a fist and hit the glass wall with all his strength. Bang! Under the impact of tons of impact, several cracks appeared on the thick bulletproof glass wall. Kale's face was indifferent as he continued to wave his right fist. The cracks continued to expand and spread, but the noise also attracted the attention of the researchers and guards in the basement. God! What are you doing? Stop! After the 2 researchers opened the door, they saw the scene of Kale punching the glass tank. They were so scared that they sat on the ground. Kyle acted as if he didn't hear what they said. He gathered strength in his right hand and punched the cracked glass wall with all his strength. Chapter 110. Splash! The translucent nutrient fluid flowed all over the floor. The mutated girl's body was still curled up on the ground with her eyes closed as she rolled on the floor. Kale waved his hand and took out a white item card. It turned into a large windbreaker and covered her naked body. Who are you? Let go of the test subject. Damn it. She'll die if she stays outside like this. Huddled at the door, the 2 researchers who didn't know what was going on cursed. Kyle indifferently picked up the Japanese gun and aimed it at them. He pulled the trigger repeatedly, and the bullets hit the medical staff's head right between their eyebrows. The noise in the isolation room quieted down again. "Thank you," a weak voice came into his mind again. Cale turned around and saw that the electrocardiogram on the screen of the unconscious mutated girl on the ground was even lower. It showed that her vital signs were slipping away. Cale hesitated for a moment. He took out a white ability card without thinking too much and used it on the mutated girl's body. In just half a second, the electrocardiogram screen that was silent on the side quickly bounced into a curve with a huge contrast. In Cale's perception, the mutated girl who was originally dead on the ground became lively again. Her fair face regained its color, and her breathing and heartbeat could be clearly seen. "It's working. It seems like your life shouldn't end here," Cale exclaimed. What he used just now was the rare white ability card, Life Extension. It could add 3 months of natural life to a person. It was his first time trying to use it on a person who was about to die. He did not expect it to work so quickly. The mutated girl's eyelashes fluttered slightly. She then opened her big eyes and sat up with a surprised expression on her face. She then looked at Cale, who was next to her. "Did you save me?" Her lips did not move. She was still talking with her brain waves after she woke up. "Of course." Cale squatted down carelessly and looked into the eyes of the girl who the gentleman called Little Lowly. He said coldly, "Girl, do you desire life and power?" Even with the mutated girl's quick cognitive ability, she did not completely understand the meaning of Cale's words, but she still nodded firmly, her small hands grabbing the trousers of the Venom suit. "That's good. From now on, you must listen to my orders," Cale said. The girl understood and nodded. Someone has broken into the laboratory. Behind Cale, the sound of many footsteps could be heard at the door. Several guards in protective suits were armed with firearms. They opened fire as soon as they entered the door. The bullets fell on the back of the Venom suit and bounced off. "Use your ability to kill them. Can you do it?" Cale didn't turn around to pay attention to the guards who had opened fire as he spoke to the girl in front of him. His philosophy was simple: "I'll save you, but I won't save you for nothing. I must prove my worth here." The mutated girl opened her clear eyes. Without any hesitation, she looked at the large equipment beside the sink. The equipment seemed to be pulled by an invisible force as it floated weightlessly, but it only moved half a meter towards the enemy at the door before it lost its momentum and stagnated. "You're not used to it yet. Try a smaller object," Cale suggested as he was still scratching his back from the bullets. The mutated girl nodded, took a deep breath, and looked at the broken glass on the ground again. A few pieces of glass floated lightly and quickly flew to the door, turning into sharp weapons that pierced into the hearts of the guards. "Well done." Cale stood up with slight satisfaction. At the same time, the guards behind him all fell down. This was fast cognition. Perhaps it was the girl's first time killing someone, but her cognitive ability allowed her to quickly deduce in her mind, if she wanted to kill someone with a few pieces of broken glass, she needed to attack the fatal part, which was the brain or the heart. "You will follow me from now on and become a sharp blade in my hand," Cale said bluntly. "Do you have a name?" "K-208. Faced with the answer, the mutated girl replied telepathically. "That's not a name." Cale shook his head, looked at the mutated girl's bright and clear pupils, and said, "From now on, you will be called Yutong Carl, and you can call me Boss, or Patriarch." "Boss." Yutong telepathically transmitted her voice and simply chose one. Learn to speak properly in the future, don't always use telepathic voice, Cale said with a headache. The girl's telepathic voice was very similar to the voice of Venom when it was symbiotic. Sometimes the two voices overlapped in his mind and buzzed endlessly. "Yes, boss." Yutong spoke, her voice was soft like a baby's voice. "I'll teach you the rest later, but now I'll teach you one thing. killing people. Kale smiled, taking Yutong, and walked towards the dozens of guards who gathered to resist outside the door. Mikado's mansion. The Mikado knelt in the hall with a haggard face, and his men quietly waited on him. He had just sent the latest news: Demon Kale was not dead, and he destroyed the Biological Research Institute next to Mount Fuji, leaving the same demon card as before. That person, is he really a demon from hell? Why can't he be killed? Ninja organizations, army armed forces, they are all a group of. The Mikado sighed heavily. Every night he slept for the past few days, he was awakened by the dream of the semicircular cave in the Kanai area. The Mikado was silent for a long time, and finally made a decision in his heart, and said softly, "Go and prepare, let the soldiers and troops still outside Nissan stop the war and withdraw to the mainland." "Your Majesty, this..." The man hesitated, not knowing whether to persuade him or not. The Mikado decisively waved his sleeve, "Go. The situation is no longer up to us. The man has only been here for less than a week, and Tokyo is about to fall. If he continues to stay, Nissan won't be a country anymore. I believe the warlords and the cabinet will agree with my decision." "Yes." The man nodded and retreated. He knew that this was the precursor of the Mikado's choice to surrender. He was forced to surrender by an invader. It was very humiliating, but also very realistic. As long as one faced that man, one would know how terrifying he was. Nissan mobilized the soldiers and troops on the front line of the Asian War and returned to the mainland. Although they did not openly surrender, the scene of them lowering their heads and stopping shocked all the countries in the world who were participating in the war and watching. Many countries' higher-ups were puzzled. Why did Nissan, who was arrogant not long ago, take the initiative to retreat? They sent agents to investigate and soon found the reason behind it and got a definite answer. Kale. It was that war maniac again. Demon Butcher. For the past few days, Tokyo had been closed off to the outside world. Most people thought that Kale, who had gone to Tokyo alone, had died, but some Americans and Europeans did not want to believe it. Who would have thought that not only was he not dead, but he was also alive and kicking in Tokyo? The main Air Force base was completely annihilated, more than half of the Bushido Foundation's dojo was lost, and tens of thousands of army soldiers and ninja organizations were killed. Too violent. After this battle, Kale had another nickname, Tyrant. And this was under the premise that Nissan had not officially announced its surrender. When Nissan surrendered and returned, Kale would be the god in the hearts of the people who yearned for peace. Chapter 111. New York, United States, Senator's Office. A wine glass with more than half of the red wine slammed on the floor, and the female secretary timidly retreated to the corner. Senator Ivan's face was full of ferocity, and he roared angrily, "What the hell? Is Nissan really ready to surrender?" The secretary replied, "That's exactly what our people said. The emperor is already persuading the warlords and the cabinet to announce the surrender when the army completely returns to the mainland. A bunch of trash. The power of a country can't even deal with one person." Ivan sat in his office chair, his forehead full of cold sweat, and panicked for a long time, and concluded, "We must not let him come back. If he comes back, I'm afraid I'm finished. When Nissan announces the surrender in 2 days, that person will come back, and there's no way to stop this trend now." The female secretary said helplessly. "So, he must die in Nissan, the army, ninja, and fighter jets can't kill him, then?" Ivan paused, and asked coldly, "Today, didn't the Strategic Research Department say that the 2 experimental nuclear weapons have basically been completed?" "Yes." The female secretary looked at him with palpitating heart, and said, "But there are only 2 experimental nuclear bombs. Even if they are released in Tokyo, it's estimated that they can only cover less than half of the area." Ivan scratched his head fiercely, his veins bulging as he muttered, "Half is enough. I don't believe that luck will always be on his side. Hydra's lord and the underground undead will protect us. The female secretary continued to persuade, forcing Kale, the war hero, to Nissan, Tokyo. The United States upper echelons now feel that they have done wrong, and will never agree to use nuclear weapons again. If you make a wrong move, then you will have to follow the wrong steps in the future. Not only can you test nuclear bombs to deter other countries, but you can also accidentally eliminate a powerful competitor. They don't dare to agree, and become sinners, but they won't take the initiative to reject. Ivan made up his mind, narrowed his eyes and said, "Go, use the people we planted around the upper echelons. I will guide and facilitate this matter." "I understand." The female secretary nodded. Half a day later. At the border of Nissan's Tokyo, two people, one big and one small, were walking in the wilderness. Kale's Venom suit was disguised as a hooded leather jacket, jeans, and leather boots, making him look more mature and steady. The hood covered his conspicuous blonde hair. Yutong had her hair tied up to her waist and was wearing a Nissan kimono that was a few sizes too small. The reason was that even in Kale's rich card space, there was no children's clothing. He could only temporarily find a children's kimono in the research institute for her to wear. She kicked the wooden stool and followed behind Kale. She was 1 meter tall and didn't even reach his waist. Her exposed white skin made her look like a delicate porcelain doll. "By the way, this is for you," Kale thought for a while and took out a blue card. He then turned it into a solid form and threw it to Lin Huang. Yutong condensed her eyes and didn't mean to reach out to catch it. The rectangular object was suspended in front of her. It was the Rizang sword Murasame. The body of the sword reflected the cold light in the sun. Your mind control ability has to adapt to the weight of this Murasame. When you can move it freely to 10 meters away from your body, your attack ability will improve by a big step. Kale pondered and said. The control strengthened by mind control was neither strong nor weak. The weight and distance of the controlled object greatly limited the performance of this ability. If it's paired with a sodium-carbon steel sword, the effect will be completely different and there will be a qualitative change. Yutong nodded as if she understood, as if she got a toy. Under the control of mind, the Murasame blade took her body as the axis and constantly rotated slowly within 1 meter away from her body. But in this way, why did it have a strange feeling? Kale glanced back and couldn't help but complain in his heart. He said, "Come on, try to attack me." Yutong raised her eyes and controlled the tip of the Murasame blade to stab his back slightly faster. Kale didn't look back. The right hand finger wrapped in the vibranium arm guard flicked back, and the Murasame blade flew back. "Too slow, come again." Kale shook his head gently. In fact, this speed was already quite fast. Ordinary soldiers couldn't avoid it when they were unprepared, but for him, it was really too slow. Yutong was a little unconvinced and continued to control the Murasame blade to attack Kale with her mind. The result was naturally a complete defeat, but in the process, her mind control ability became more and more skilled. Just like that, the two of them, one in front and one behind, approached the army base in Tokyo. "Well, let's take a break," Kerr said. Behind him, Yutong's spirit was dispirited, she consumed a lot of energy and was gasping for breath. She dragged the cursed blade Murasame with her hands. This should be the last battle in Nissan this time. Kale stood on the hillside and looked down at the large camp base on the flat ground less than 100 meters below. Nissan's top management finally loosened. As long as he stepped up the rhythm and gave the last heavy blow, this straw was enough to crush the thin camel. Kale was preparing to leave. He keenly heard a sound and turned back. At the end of the sky behind him, a B-29 bomber was faintly seen passing through the sky. Then, an object was thrown down. Wait, it can't be. Kale opened his mouth wide and the worst idea flashed in his mind. He watched the object land thousands of meters away. Boom! The bright and dazzling light of the day glowed from the ground at the end of the vision. Kale's face changed dramatically. He reacted quickly and grabbed Yutong behind him and rushed toward the army base at full speed. Behind him, a giant mushroom cloud appeared and quickly expanded into the sky and the ground. The scorching wave of the explosion destroyed everything on the ground. Nuclear bomb. It was a nuclear bomb. Kale's eyes were bloodshot. He grabbed Yutong and ran as if he was racing against death. The explosion behind him was getting closer and closer. If he couldn't find enough cover, he would be directly hit by the power of the nuclear bomb on the flat ground. He would be turned into ashes before Thanos could snap his fingers. Sprint in the air. Go. Faster. Kyle stepped into the air, and his already terrifying speed increased to another level. His entire body brought with it a wave of air as he charged straight into the main base. The army base was in chaos. Countless soldiers fled in despair. Some officers just took off their shirts and committed seppuku. Kale broke into the base with Yutong. He quickly glanced around and saw a sealed dry well. He quickly rushed forward and used Murasame to cut the chain and jump down with Yutong. Almost at the next moment when he jumped into the dry well, the explosion of the nuclear bomb swallowed the base above. The dust with the scorching wave poured into the dry well. Squeak, the first to scream, was Venom. Under the scorching wave of the nuclear bomb, it quickly fell off Kale's body. Kale gritted his teeth and supported himself on the wall of the well with his hands. He resisted the blast wave and radiation damage with his bare upper body. His tough skin and muscles were burned and torn by the impact and were forcibly repaired under the self-healing factor. The damage and self-healing became a torturous tug-of-war. Chapter 112. At the end of World War II, in April 1944, the United States dropped 2 experimental nuclear bombs on the Tokyo-Nissan area. This was the first time a destructive weapon that could affect the world war and deter all countries appeared on Earth. The indiscriminate explosion and inhumane radiation far exceeded the previous natural disasters and viral plagues. The whole world was shocked. Under the attack of the nuclear bomb, Nissan was forced to bow down to Kale. This time, they really did not delay any longer. Within a day of the nuclear explosion, they announced unconditional surrender to the world. Nissan's withdrawal from the Asian battlefield also represented the end of World War II in Marvel's human history. People all over the world cheered. The long-awaited period of peace had finally arrived. The streets and alleys of every city in the United States were decorated with lanterns and streamers and fireworks. It was 10 times more grand than Christmas in the past. Most people did not sleep and partied for 3 days and 3 nights. During this period, of course, they did not forget the greatest contributor to world peace, the war hero Kale. After the end of World War II, thousands of people waited patiently for 3 days, but there was still no sign of Kale's return from the New York military. Countless media outlets that wanted to interview were denied access to the White House and the military base. They were strictly prohibited from asking about this topic. This made the people excited and happy, but they finally noticed that something was wrong. Why hasn't General Kale returned yet? Even if the transport jet was delayed, he should have returned to America by now. God, why hasn't our superhero returned? Where's General Chester? Won't the military give an explanation? From the old to the young, the people in the United States were looking forward to it every day. The topic of peace after World War II was suppressed by the topic of the hero Kale did not return in just a few days. Other countries were also watching and discussing. The senior members of the United States government felt that they could not hide it from the people. They were about to discuss a cover-up that could be handled. Unexpectedly, at this moment, a piece of information began to circulate. When the United States military dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Tokyo Nissan, Major General Kale was still fighting there. No one sent a transport jet to contact him in advance. As soon as this news spread in New York, the senior management of the American empire realized that something was wrong and wanted to suppress it. However, they still underestimated the high level of attention that the people of New York paid to Kale. In less than half a day, this news exploded in the United States like a super-large nuclear bomb. Countless people were skeptical, but at the same time, it caused an uproar. My God, if that's really the case, then Major General Kale wouldn't. War heroes can't be killed. How can they die at the hands of their own people? Our own people? I'm afraid that the country's higher-ups don't see him as one of their own, right? The White House didn't say anything. Could it be a tacit agreement? You must give us an explanation for this matter. On the morning of the second day after this news spread, countless people poured into New York City emotionally. The local people of New York formed their own team. They held signs of various sizes and paraded in the streets, causing traffic to be paralyzed in the entire city. The sea of people surrounded the White House and the surrounding senator's office building. The senior management of the American empire panicked. They immediately mobilized the entire police force and military in New York to maintain order and quell the commotion. However, they found that many soldiers and police officers had applied for leave at the last minute. Some had even applied for resignation. They put on bright coats and held up protest signs to join the parade. At this time, the senior management of the American empire suddenly understood how great the influence of Kale alone was. As the war hero who pacified World War II, at the beginning of world peace, his prestige had undoubtedly reached a terrifying peak that even God had to avoid. How could the thousands of people not go crazy with anger when such an important piece of news came out at this time? On the top floor of Stark Industries, Howard, who was in a suit, leaned against the railing of the balcony. He looked at the densely packed people on the streets below and silently lit a cigarette. With your own strength, you can stand shoulder to shoulder with God. You really did it. But why didn't you come back like Steve? I was thinking that when I have a child one day, I must let you be the child's godfather. Even the business empire that we originally agreed to drink to our heart's content after the war, create artificial intelligence, develop new energy elements, and build weapons and technology, all of these are going to be missed. Howard muttered to himself and kept sighing heavily. He lowered his head and smoked alone. The smoke that he exhaled drifted with the wind. Beep. Just then, the phone in his suit pocket rang. How annoying. Howard put out the cigarette in annoyance. Suddenly, he thought of something. He was stunned for half a second by the ringing of the phone. Wait a minute. Who else could be calling him now except for that person? Howard shivered and hurriedly took out the old phone in his pocket. After taking a deep breath to calm himself down, he picked up the phone with trembling fingers. Is this Howard? Kale's cold voice came from the other side of the phone. Kale, it's really you. Howard laughed out loud. His eyes were slightly wet. He kissed the old phone hard. Wow, don't be so disgusting. You should spread it to your bunny girls. Kale said with a chill. He hadn't seen this old gentleman for 2 weeks and he was becoming more and more improper. Aren't I just excited? Buddy. Howard said happily and sadly. It's been more than a week since the war ended. You still haven't come back. I thought you really got hit by a nuclear bomb. Kale said, sorry, I really got hit by one. Howard was speechless. He hesitated for a moment and asked tentatively, Kale, are you a human or a ghost now? Nonsense, you are a scientific genius. Why do you believe in ghosts? I am now outside of central New York. There are a lot of people here. The traffic is paralyzed and I can't get in. Send that private jet to pick me up. Kale said angrily. Last time, he and Howard discussed the concept and structure of the helicopter. Before he went to Nissan, he knew that Howard had already modified the structure of the small transport jet and created the first small and convenient semi-helicopter as a private jet. He had to say, having a scientific genius friend with top-notch thinking and maxed-out practical skills, the benefits were perfectly reflected at this time. The traffic in New York City is paralyzed because of you, Howard complained to the phone. Knowing that Cale had returned safely, his previous depression and sadness were gone. Howard said with a smile, I heard that the new president, senators, and military officials were forced by the unprecedented demonstration of the public. They are now gathering in front of the White House to hold a press conference to give a public explanation. That information is. As soon as Cale opened his mouth, Howard knew what he wanted to ask. He smiled and said, That's right. Nick Fry and I deliberately spread the information. We want to use the power of the public to put pressure on the American government and get justice for you. Cale's heart warmed. He paused for a moment, then said coldly to the phone, Fly the helicopter over and send me directly to the White House. It's time to clean up some of the little rats who are playing tricks behind the scenes. Chapter 113. Washington, D.C., United States. Since this was not the city, New York, where the hero Cale was born, the number of people marching was not enough to fill the entire city. However, close to the city center, it was still crowded and noisy, especially in the White House Square where the high-level officials of the United States were about to make a public speech. Outside the defense line of the speech platform, the inner three circles were lined up by a large group of media in advance. The outer three circles and beyond, the end of the crowd could not be seen at a glance. Among the onlookers, a little boy about 7 years old held the mold of Cale's battle suit in one hand and the trouser leg of the uncle next to him firmly in the other. He asked uneasily, Dad, did hero Cale really die? How is that possible? The uncle smiled and rubbed the boy's short hair hard. He said confidently and firmly, Major General Cale, he won't die. The crowd around them also laughed in unison, echoing one after another. That's right, how can a war hero die? He's a superhero, suppressing the chaos of war, a god in our hearts. Maybe he's just like the captain, just asleep somewhere and will come back when he wakes up. When they talked about Cale, their faces were full of smiles, confidence, pride, and even hope. The media on the side kept taking photos and videos, recording this rare scene. It was the first time that someone's prestige was enough to replace the gods and was worshipped by tens of thousands of people without any blemishes. He's coming, he's coming. With a reminder from the square, all the onlookers and media immediately focused their attention on the White House speech platform. The new, middle-aged, square-faced president walked in the front, leading a group of politicians in suits and generals in uniforms. Under the cover of armed soldiers, they walked out of the office building's entrance and ascended to the slightly spacious stage for the speech. Dozens of politicians and generals stopped in the rear half of the platform, their faces solemn and serious, making the onlookers subconsciously quiet down. The new president wiped the sweat from his forehead and walked forward to the loudspeaker microphone. He faced the people and media outside the police line and said in a politician's tone, Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. However, his words were quickly interrupted by the people below. Mr. President, please skip the pleasantries. We're here for an explanation and the truth. Why hasn't General Cale returned? The new president quickly covered up his awkwardness. He steadied the microphone with his hand and said, Major General Cale, he was about to smoothly recite the cover-up that the higher-ups had discussed just now, but just as he opened his mouth to speak, he choked and stopped. The new president looked down at the countless pairs of eyes that were filled with hope and anticipation. Even with his outstanding oratorical skills, he was momentarily at a loss for words. Just as the president was in a dilemma, a spiral buzzing noise suddenly came from the sky not far away. Everyone looked up in surprise and saw a new aircraft with bamboo dragonfly wings slowly flying close to the high platform of the White House Square. The armed soldiers and guards thought it was a terrorist attack and were about to rush to the high platform to cover the retreat of the high-level personnel. But when they saw a tall figure at the door of the helicopter, they suddenly stopped. In other words, everyone below stopped moving in a daze, held their breath, and stared at the young man in the battle suit standing at the door of the helicopter. "It's General Kale." No one knew who took the lead to shout, and then, the originally silent Washington Square suddenly boiled with excitement. "Our war hero has returned." The people raised their arms high and cheered with tears in their eyes. The loud sound spread quickly and soon, the entire sky above the city of Washington was filled with the cheers of the hero's return. At this time, the most embarrassed people were the high-level officials who were originally the focus of attention on the high platform. They could only applaud with a bitter smile as they watched the helicopter get closer and closer. The helicopter stopped 20 meters above the high platform and hovered in the air. Kale nodded and jumped down. He glided a little in the middle and finally landed lightly in the center of the high platform. He was dressed in a black battle suit and carried his iconic one-handed sword on his back. He stood tall and straight on the high platform. With the blessing of the superhero halo, he immediately became the most dazzling protagonist on the scene. No matter how high the status of the politicians and generals were, they had to lower their heads. The tens of thousands of people below were still applauding excitedly. The applause was thunderous. "Major General Kale, you're finally back." The president turned around and wanted to be polite. Who knew that Kale didn't even look at him and walked alone to where the senators and generals were? Faced with the approach of this killing god, even the generals who had experienced all kinds of battles had a slight change in expression, not to mention the senators sitting in the greenhouse. Their faces were pale. Among them, Senator Ivan and a few other senators who were standing at the back clenched their hands nervously and resisted the urge to collapse to the ground in fear. "Kale." General Chester sighed and stepped forward. "General Chester, as you wish, I'm back." Kale stopped and said coldly. "Kale. No matter what you've experienced, it's all my fault. Don't hurt anyone else." General Chester didn't finish his words before Kale interrupted him. "No, you're not wrong." Kale sneered. "You're just old and confused." General Chester was speechless and didn't refute. His white hair made him look like a haggard old man. The helicopter was still hovering at a low altitude. A rope was thrown down from the cabin and Fry slid down to the high platform. Howard knew that Kale had returned and immediately notified Fry. Then, he rushed to the White House in Washington with him. Of course, there was a reason for doing so. "Fry, who did you find?" Kale waved to Fry behind him and scanned the senators in front of him. The senators felt a chill. They didn't know what this war hero wanted to do as soon as he returned. That one, oh, and that one. Fu Rui walked forward, his eyes sharp as he pointed out 3 counselors, including Yifan. The 3 senators trembled. The other senators and generals didn't know what was going on, but they still subconsciously moved away from the 3 to a safe distance. "Oh." Kale nodded coldly and walked towards the 3 senators. "Major General Kale, what are you doing? Don't come over." Among them, Ivan's eyes flashed with a trace of panic. He shouted and questioned, "This is the White House Square. In front of the senators and generals who represent the country, as well as the general public and the media, watch your behavior." Kale sneered and rushed in front of Yifan. Before the armed soldiers around him could react, his right hand had clenched into a fist and landed on Yifan's lower abdomen. Bang! With Ivan's body as an ordinary person, he was sent flying backward like a ball after taking the punch with a ton of force. Half of his body sank into the white wall of the office building. His body was completely crippled. He spat out blood and opened his eyes wide. Even in death, he couldn't understand how he could die in such a simple and violent way. Chapter 114. Kyle, you. General Chester's face was filled with shock as he looked at the dead Councilman Ivan. His lips trembled slightly, but he didn't say anything as he sighed. He was not the only one who was shocked by Kale's amazing actions. The congressmen, officers near the platform, the media and the people in the distance below all opened their mouths in unison. It was too bloody and violent, and the other party was a congressman. Your tricks don't work on me. Kale whispered coldly. His eyes moved away from Ivan's body and fell on the other two congressmen who had fallen to the ground in front of him. Help me, General, help me. He's crazy. Where are the soldiers and guards? Stop him. The two congressmen were trembling with fear, and without their previous gentlemanly demeanor, they struggled to crawl on the ground of the platform, trying to escape from the area where Kale was. Kale's face was indifferent as he continued to walk slowly towards the two. Kale, stop it. That's a congressman. You will destroy the national order by doing this. General Chester raised his voice to persuade. Is that so? Kale smiled and said coldly, if the higher-ups are infiltrated by the Hydra organization and still don't know it, then I don't mind forcibly setting things right and replacing the high-level structure with new blood. Hydra organization? General Chester's face changed dramatically as he looked directly at Kale and took a deep breath and asked, do you have evidence? If I say so, why do I need evidence? Kale said as he came to another Hydra spy and lifted his left foot slightly. This time, the other party really flew out like a ball, rolling in the air and smashing into the pit where Ivan was previously. You are too lawless. Even if he is a member of the Hydra organization, he must be sanctioned by the law. General Chester frowned deeply. The new president also said seriously in a hurry, Major General Kale, although you are a war hero, everything needs to be investigated by the relevant departments in detail. You can't kill a congressman on suspicion alone. Just do what you think is right. I have a clear conscience. After Kale finished, he ignored their warnings and persuasions and walked towards the last Hydra spy congressman who collapsed on the ground. Kale. General Chester gritted his teeth and looked at the congressmen with fear on their faces. He immediately made a judgment and quickly raised his arm. With a crash, dozens of armed soldiers around the platform aimed their weapons at Kale on the platform. This scene aroused the exclamation of countless people in the square. Kale paused, glanced at the armed soldiers, and asked straightforwardly, are you also going to be my enemy? All the armed soldiers trembled slightly and were about to put down their guns that had not been unlocked. General Chester saw this and immediately shouted, what are you doing? You are the elite soldiers who maintain the law and order. What he was afraid of wasn't Kyle's individual strength. What he was afraid of was that with Kyle's prestige, he would be able to ignore the rules and regulations and do whatever he wanted. This is also the main reason why the high-level officials of the United States have always been afraid of Kale. The armed soldiers hesitated and raised the guns in their hands again. But in the next moment, the people in the square below have spoken in unison, put down your weapons. Put down your weapons. What are you doing? Major General Kale naturally has his reasons for doing what he did. Those congressmen must be spies. You use weapons like this to deal with a war hero who has contributed to peace? The people don't know what's going on now, but they know one thing very clearly, Kale is a hero and he must be right. Whoever deals with Kale and stands on the opposite side of him is undoubtedly a spy villain of a terrorist organization. Still flying the helicopter at a low altitude, Howard in the pilot's seat listened to the voices of thousands of people who stood up for Kale and suddenly laughed. Kale, this is the real God. Originally, he had reached the peak of a superhero. After the Battle of Nissan, the world returned to peace. Kale's prestige image in people's minds has already created a layer of God's justice golden body for him. Under the influence of this enthusiastic voice, dozens of armed soldiers looked at each other and put down the guns in their hands. Under everyone's gaze, Kyle simply kicked the last Hydra spy into the pit in the wall. The wall had completely collapsed, burying the three bodies a little. General Chester didn't say anything again. He slowly turned around with a tired and old face, bowed slightly and left the high platform in advance. The new president was silent for a moment, then his face sank slightly and he announced majestically to the public, Major General Kale has solved the 3 spy congressmen who endangered national security. In the future, I will apply to the International Security Council to form a department to search and eliminate the remnants of the Hydra organization that are still lurking in the world. The specific matters will be supervised and implemented by Major General Kale. This was obviously something that people in the square cheered for the president's actions on the spot. The reaction was quite fast, worthy of being a president. Kale praised in his heart, walked beside the president, and said to the public, now that the war is over, there is no longer a need for national symbols of conquest and strength. Here, I officially resign from the position of Major General. Without waiting for the people and the media to react, Kale gave the new president a meaningful look and said softly, as for the thing you said, give it to Nick Fry, he is my spokesperson. What? Fry, who was still standing on the high platform, exclaimed and was about to step forward to express his opinion when he saw Kale sprinting in the air and jumping directly to the door of the helicopter's cabin. The helicopter rose with Kale and flew towards the sky in the direction of New York. In the tide of voices of the people, Fry watched the helicopter go away and smiled bitterly. Why do I feel like I'm being blamed by you again? When Major Kale was in command, he led the Roaring Commandos for him. When Major General Kale was in command, he led a fleet of battleships for him. Now that Kale has resigned from the military, he thought he could take a good rest, but he didn't expect that there was still a department that had not been applied for. Next time, I must ask him for extra pay. Fry gritted his teeth. On the helicopter leaving the city of Washington, Howard sat in the main driver's seat, while Kale and a black-haired little girl in a hoodie sat in the back. It's still early. Do you want to go back to the Stark Industries building for a drink? Howard suggested in a good mood. Just take me back to where Logan is. Next time, bring Fry along. There are still children here. Kale gestured to Yutong who was sitting next to him. How did you bring her back? I asked you just now, but you didn't say anything. Howard asked in surprise and looked back at the cute and obedient Yutong. You old gentleman, everything that comes out of your mouth is a hooligan. Kale shrugged and rubbed Yutong's little head. He said solemnly, this child is also like Logan. She has a special mutant ability. At the bottom of the last well in Nissan Tokyo, he could only use his body to block most of the residual power of the nuclear bomb, but there were still explosive waves and radiation damage that attacked Yutong. Chapter 115. On the outskirts of New York, near the border of Queens, it was far away from the bustling big city, but it was also comfortable and quiet. Surrounded by a green forest, a large Western-style manor built in the old era sat in the open space, casting a light shadow under the afternoon sun. The helicopter flew directly over the manor from Washington and buzzed, blowing up the sand and fallen leaves as it slowly landed in the open space in front of the manor. This big movement, of course, had attracted the attention of the people in the manor. The door opened, and Kyle just got off from the back seat of the helicopter with Yutong. With a cry of surprise, a beautiful female figure rushed out of the manor's gate and couldn't wait to jump into his arms. Kale, you're finally back. Lucy. Kale smiled, his handsome face showing a rare gentle smile. He sniffed the fragrance of the girl's golden hair and hugged her delicate body in his arms. Following his gaze, Logan, dressed in denim, also appeared at the entrance of the manor. He leaned against the stairs of the double-story building and also lit a cigarette with a smile. Howard, I'm home. Would you like to come in and sit down? Kale turned his head and greeted Howard in the pilot's seat of the helicopter. Howard smiled and declined, you just came back. Have a good rest with your family. I'll come find you in a few days. No problem. Kyle nodded. There were too many things that he and Howard had planned to do, and they were not in a hurry to do it now. The important thing now was to check how well Logan did with the test mission. Cale held Lucy's waist with one hand and waved for Yutong to follow with the other. When they approached the manor, Logan avoided eye contact and nervously put out the cigarette and stepped back into the house first. What's wrong with Logan? Cale was secretly surprised, but soon he understood what was going on. In the main building of the manor, there were low-key and luxurious classical lights on the roof, decorations, and furniture. There were more than a dozen rooms of various sizes. 3 girls around 14 years old in servants' clothes were cleaning. When they saw Logan walking in front, Lucy holding Cale's arm and Yutong walk in, they were about to greet the owner of the manor, Logan. "Wait, this is the owner here." Logan coldly stopped them and waved at Cale as he said in a deep voice. The 3 girls were stunned and looked at Cale timidly. They quickly bowed their heads and bowed. "Hello, Master." "Good." Cale smiled and nodded. At this time, he seemed to have discovered something and turned his gaze to one of the rooms. From there, he could faintly hear the voices of many young children. Lucy smiled and led Cale to the door of the room. The room had been renovated into a separate classroom. There was a blackboard and a desk, and a man in sunglasses was teaching a security class. Below the stage, there were more than 30 children around 8 years old listening attentively. Logan walked forward and said helplessly, "Boss, I'll explain this to you." "Explain slowly. I'm very curious. When I asked you to adopt 10 children, you evaded it left and right. Now you're actually taking the initiative to complete the task." Cale blinked and was a little surprised. How did Logan succeed in his job transition so quickly? "Uncle Wolf, where's your pride as a combatant? You've really become a nanny?" On the second floor of the manor, in the master's meeting room, Cale and Lucy, together with Yutong, sat on a large sofa. Logan sat alone on the other side and began to report on the mission. In general, Logan had originally followed the mission's procedures and bribed the director of an orphanage to prepare to adopt 10 children. Who knew that he would discover signs of the orphanage staff abusing the children, so he couldn't help but act. He accidentally killed the staff and demolished most of the orphanage. With the orphanage gone, most of the children in the orphanage were all adopted by Logan into the manor on his own initiative. There were 32 children between the ages of 8 and 10. He listed them as children that could be taught and nurtured. As for the rest, there were 8 children above the age of 10 who were responsible for the manor's daily chores. Orphans during the war, although young, are very sensible and obedient. Those children above the age of 10 don't meet the mission's requirements, so they can be used to replace the manor's daily chores. Logan said awkwardly. No matter what, he had violated the mission's requirements. "I have no objections. Your way of doing things can't be said to be wrong." Cale nodded. 40 children was neither too many nor too few. It was just enough to be the lowest level personnel to establish the family's power. He paused, looked directly at Logan, and said with a smile, "Also, I'm very happy that you can finally let go of your excessive defenses and be willing to accept and trust others." Lucy also smiled and said in agreement, "Isn't that so? Uncle Logan is very popular with the children here." Logan touched his nose awkwardly. During this period of time, he had indeed experienced another life surrounded by those children. Back to the main topic. Cale thought for a moment and asked straightforwardly, "Logan, what do you think I want to do by letting you adopt so many orphans?" "Family Cal, to nurture talents." Logan's response was concise and powerful. "That's right. My position for the future Family Cal is to be an extraordinary and independent private organization. It won't be responsible for external crises on Earth and will only listen to my orders." Cale said confidently. Why did he choose orphans? Because he had the ability to bestow cards. Blue grade and above cards could only be bestowed to one person. Therefore, it didn't matter if his subordinates had potential or ability. The most important thing was loyalty. When children were raised from a young age, it was easy to brainwash them into relying on and trusting the family. They would then protect and carry out orders from the bottom of their hearts. Otherwise, no matter how strong they were, like the future S.H.E.L.D., Kamartaj, and the others, they were all betrayed by internal members. They were almost destroyed and almost fell apart. But there's one thing you're wrong about. I'm not nurturing talents, but heroes. Kale added. The heroes he was talking about were the basic abilities and qualities of heroes. The heroes in Marvel had to have abilities that surpassed ordinary people. This was basic knowledge. In his preparation for the future, the subordinates of the lowest members of Family Cal had to at least reach the level of Black Widow and Hawkeye. Otherwise, they wouldn't be qualified to call themselves members of Family Cal. When the children downstairs grow up, they will go through testing missions. Those who are qualified can stay in the Family Cal's overseas territory for a long time. They will only be the lowest-ranked apprentices of Family Cal. The few of you here are the core members of Family Cal. Kale's gaze fell on Lucy, Logan, and Yutong. Needless to say, Lucy was his fiancée. Even if she was a weak ordinary person, her status was still higher than the others. Logan and Yutong were born with genetic mutations. They originally had rare blue-grade abilities. In the future, if they were bestowed with a suitable ability card, they would definitely become the cornerstone of the family's power. Chapter 116. Kale. Who is this child? In the master meeting room, Lucy's beautiful eyes fell on Yutong, who was sitting coldly on the soft sofa to Kale's right. From the moment they entered the room, Yutong hadn't moved half a step away from Kale. It was as if she was instinctively clinging to him. Although Lucy wouldn't be jealous over a child, she was still surprised by this. In fact, she wasn't the only one. Even Logan was a little confused. After all, Kale didn't seem like someone who would casually raise a child. Logan had been secretly sizing up Yutong, who was sitting across from him. The sharp animal instinct of the lone wolf gene told him that this cute little girl wearing a hood and long-sleeved sweater was far from being as harmless as she looked. Oh right, I almost forgot. Kale suddenly remembered. He rubbed Yutong's little head and said, Yutong, say hello to Lucy and Logan. My name is Yutong Carl. I'm 8 years old this year. Boss picked me up in Tokyo Nissan. Yutong's voice was soft and didn't pretend to be cold like before. Lucy was instantly amused. Kale, you really know how to pick up. Lucy stuck out her pink tongue and glanced at Kale in annoyance. She seemed to be similar to a pet who was picked up from the battlefield. Wait a minute. She couldn't be a child bride, too, right? Lucy thought to herself. As a woman, the way she looked at Yutong changed slightly. She had to admit that the other party was really cute. Her body was petite and delicate, her little face was like carved jade, and her skin was tender and fair. Even she had the urge to hug her like a plush doll. Yutong frowned slightly and moved closer to Kale. Seeming to have noticed her abnormality, Kale asked curiously, what's wrong? She's hostile towards me. Yutong looked indifferently at Lucy and said straightforwardly. As soon as she finished speaking, the meeting room fell silent for a moment. Kale and Logan had strange expressions and looked at Lucy at the same time. This made Lucy blush and cover her beautiful face. She said, I'll go get some drinks, and hurriedly left the meeting room. Logan reacted quickly and realized something. His sharp eyes stared fixedly at Yutong and he said gravely, Boss, this girl can read minds? I can't hear your thoughts and I can't hear boss. Yutong was fuming. This time, she spoke with her brain waves, which made Logan cover his ears subconsciously. Kale seemed to have known. After all, this was still one of the abilities of mind control. From merely controlling the spatial movement of physical entities, to breaking away from reality, to a deeper level of exploration of the thoughts of living creatures. This was only effective for ordinary people with weak minds. It had no effect on people like him and Logan who had extraordinary willpower. Object control, telepathy, telekinetic barrier, mind reading, these were the mind control abilities strengthened by mental strength. Logan. This child is the same kind of person as you. I simply call them the mutants. Kale said with a smile. The current world was not like the large-scale gene mutation in the X-Men universe. There was no information about mutants. He decided to give them this definition. Boss, are you also a mutant? Logan asked curiously. He had always thought that Kale was the same kind of person as him. I do have abilities far beyond humans, but I am fundamentally different from the two of you. Kale explained. The two of you are born with genetic mutations. That is to say, the same racial talents. You were born with special superpowers. After the natural growth of the individual, some stimuli will trigger natural instincts in childhood. This kind of innate genetic instinct is similar to your claws and self-healing, Logan, or Yutong's mind control. Some people can even race against the speed of light and time, and can control metal, water, and fire. Kale paused and continued, but I am different. My original body did not have genetic mutations. When I was a child, I was not much different from other normal people. Later, after the military's research of the super soldier drug, the perfect human body obtained through genetic modification. This kind of innate ability acquired through various drugs and radiation, I call it mutants. His super soldier ability card was copied and drawn from Steve, skipping the process of injecting the super soldier drug. I see. Logan nodded thoughtfully. After living for more than half a century, it was the first time he heard such a novel classification of ability users. Mutants are equivalent to the second great evolution of the human species, similar to the difference between apes and modern humans. While mutants are coincidences, breaking the original genetic framework and standing on the same starting line as mutants. Kale said with emotion, whether it is mutants or mutants, they are all superhumans who walk alone at the forefront of human evolution history. Some of the divine races in the world of Marvel were invincible. The Rainbow Bridge spanned the universe's galaxy. They were not weak life forms similar to the original human. Through continuous racial evolution, they mastered natural abilities such as thunder and divine power, and then stabilized the altar and built the divine realm. Gods were just the top race standing at the forefront of the evolution history of the universe's species. Looking at it this way, it was obvious why the future Hulk was able to push the gods to the ground. If we can continue to evolve and become stronger, and equip ourselves with advanced technology, perhaps our family will be able to replace the realm of gods in the future. Kyle's words were truly earth-shattering. Logan, who had always been calm, was so frightened that he trembled all over. Logan said with a wry smile, "Boss, it's hard to say if there are gods in this world. There may be no other life in the universe outside Earth. You haven't seen outside Earth, how do you know there are no other alien races? Maybe there is the Milky Way Alliance, the divine realm where the gods live." Kale smiled and did not reveal more. The people on Earth were still frogs at the bottom of the well. Only he, who had transformed into the goshawk in the sky, had long left the frame of the well and looked into the distance at the sea and stars outside. "One day, you will understand the meaning of my words." Kale returned to reality and said, "Let's do the initial planning for the family cow first. In 2 days, I will go out with Howard and take him to a turtle-shaped island in the Atlantic Ocean for inspection. We will develop the family's exclusive base. Then I will continue to stay here." Logan scratched his head. Did he really become a babysitter? "You can start teaching the children here about fighting." Kale muttered, his eyes were cold and said, "After I come back, you and Yutong, the three of us will go to the Soviet Union." "The Soviet Union?" Yes, the Soviet Union. Kale smiled. He did not forget that during the war, the Soviet Union's Secret Service training base, the Red Room organization, made some small moves behind the scenes. Chapter 117. It was morning, and the gentle sunlight shone on the forest, dispersing the white fog and blurring the light and shadows. Kale was wearing long-sleeved casual clothes and sunglasses, lying comfortably on the sun chair on the lawn of the manor, basking in the sun. Venom's body also followed the chair on the grass next to the chair, rolling restlessly back and forth on the grass. It has been 3 days since he returned to New York. Without the identity of a war hero and a general, and away from the chaos and slaughter of war, his leisure time was comfortable and long. Venom. Do you feel that there are slight changes in my body? Kale frowned and said to himself. The change in his mouth was not his relaxed state of mind, but his perfect physique at the peak of the super soldier. This feeling of change began to occur after Nissan Tokyo withstood the aftermath of the nuclear explosion. When he was symbiotic with Venom, this change was not very strong. Once he was separated from Venom, he could slightly feel the potential changes in his body. In the card space, he carefully sorted out the ability cards he had to change his physique, focusing on super soldier and self-healing factor, but he did not find the reason for this potential change. Is the radiation in the nuclear explosion affecting the originally stable genetic structure in my body? Kale thought to himself. This change was too slight for his body, and he didn't know whether it was good or bad for a while. At this moment, an extended version of the black and gold luxury car drove out of the forest road and stopped in the open space at the entrance of the manor building. 2 bodyguards in suits got out of the car in advance and respectfully opened the door for Lucy and Yutong in the car. Then they began to move the supplies in the trunk. The forest where the manor was located was still a certain distance from the town. Purchasing supplies often required driving 5 kilometers away. The car and bodyguards were recruited and arranged in advance by Howard. Howard, the old gentleman, did things in an orderly manner, and Kale was still very convinced. After so many things, the two were now the closest partners, well, in life and work. Kale, we are back. Lucy, who was wearing a sun hat, waved her hand towards the lawn. She was holding the hand of Yutong, who was a few sizes shorter than her. For some reason, the two of them had broken through the age gap and became good friends. People with the ability to read minds, in the eyes of children of the same age, were naturally fearful and in awe. However, with Yutong as a potential bodyguard, Kale felt more at ease when Lucy went out. A rolled-up black and white newspaper floated up from the bag Lucy was holding. It flew over like a bird and landed on the small table next to Kale. "Boss, today's newspaper," Yutong said telepathically. Kale, who was still lying down, nodded. He picked up the newspaper and quickly flipped through it. After reading 10 lines at a glance, he threw it on the table. The main content on the front page of the New York Times was the same as it had been for the past 2 days. It was all about him. Stark Industries would hold the World Science and Technology Expo a few months earlier. The report on the release of new products that would change the world was pitifully squeezed to the second page. News about the return of the war hero, the remnants of the terrorist organization Hydra lurking in the upper echelons of the United States, the confrontation between the upper echelons of the country and the civilian superheroes, the application of the youngest major general to retire from his position, and the replacement of officials and officers by the new president for Kale, etc., bombarded the United States day and night. The retirement of the war hero was one thing, and the symbol of the country's conquest and strength was no longer there. The media collectively gave Kale another title, Symbol of Peace. When he heard this new title the day before yesterday, Kale was stunned and almost spat out the red wine he was drinking. He was a war maniac. How did he become a symbol of peace? The problem was that the general public also approved of this title, far more than the previous devil, killing god, tyrant, and so on. Some people donated funds to build symbols of peace in some squares, and the Norwegian parliament was also discussing voting for him to win this year's Nobel Peace Prize. This had reached a point where Kale himself could not complain. But no matter what, from the moment he decided to build his family forces, he planned to fade out of the spotlight of the public and patiently prepare for the future alien invasion. Now, Kale did not dare to claim to be invincible even on Earth. Many large and small mysterious organizations were hidden in the corners of the world, not to mention the vast alien universe outside of Earth. The most reliable thing I have now, other than the ability to draw cards, is the preparation time that far exceeds that of other heroes by more than a few decades. I also know in advance about the major storyline events that are about to happen in the future. This is my biggest reliance as a transmigrator. In just 1 year, I have reached the highest level of the current super soldier, standing at the peak of the reputation and prestige of the human race on Earth, and holding endless wealth that can rival a country. After a few decades, where will family Cal and I go? Even I can't predict it. Kale thought to himself, and his heart was filled with confidence. Is the god very strong? Wait for me to climb up step by step. Is Thanos' Infinity Gloves invincible? Did he say that he could slowly gather 6 gems? By taking the initiative to prepare for the trump card, Kale would be innately invincible and act as the bigger boss behind the scenes, deducing and controlling everything. Now, this is only the first step. Kale sat up from the sun chair, and a tall bodyguard in a suit came to the edge of the lawn, bowed his head respectfully and said, "Mr. Kale, the boss said that he has flown a plane to pick you up. Okay, tell Lucy that she doesn't have to wait for me for lunch." Kale ordered, and after the bodyguard left, he glanced at Venom who was jumping excitedly beside him. "Are you coming or not?" Gurgle, Venom's black liquid body bounced up and turned into a hooded coat that draped over Kale's body. An hour and a half later. In the vast Atlantic Ocean, under the bright noon sun, a helicopter hovered hundreds of meters above the ground. "Kale, are we really close to the turtle-shaped island you mentioned?" Howard, who was in the main pilot's seat, asked in surprise. Kale, who was in the co-pilot's seat, looked down at the sea and nodded. "Well, almost there. Did you remember wrongly? There are no islands in the nearby sea area," Howard said with certainty. "You'll know later." Kale smiled mysteriously, and when the helicopter was 10 miles away from the sea, he pondered and said to Howard, "Next, you follow the process I said." "No problem." Howard nodded. He didn't believe that Kale could make an island out of thin air. "Now, give this helicopter to me," Kale said inexplicably. Howard was stunned and quickly agreed. "No problem, I'll give it to you if you want. I'll build another one later." Chapter 118. As for the item card drawing. The drawing time was much faster than the ability card. However, at the same time, the conditions for drawing were more stringent. For example, sand, paper scraps, stones. These items could not be drawn. However, a box of sand with golden sand, paper with craft design drawings, stones with master carvings, and so on could be included in the item card drawing category. This was about the value of the item. Special items such as out-of-control fighter jets, seriously damaged firearms, unstable energy bodies, grenades and nuclear bombs that were about to explode, could not be drawn. In addition, not personal items of others. This was the first condition for the item drawing. Hurry up. Under Kale's urging, Howard, who was still hesitating, immediately unbuckled his seatbelt and moved his hands and feet from the pilot's seat to the co-pilot's seat. However, the card information did not change. It was still in the state of not being able to be drawn. Still not enough? Kale pondered. He got up and stepped forward, reaching out to turn off the helicopter's engine. The helicopter hummed slightly and began to glide downward. Howard was so scared that his face turned pale. His hands quickly grabbed the internal body of the helicopter. "It's done." Cale smiled. In his eyes, the rare green-grade, modified helicopter had changed from not being able to be drawn. "What's done?" Howard was still in a daze. However, 3 seconds later, the helicopter disappeared into thin air. The 2 people inside fell from a height of hundreds of meters and fell toward the ocean. "Oh my God, Cale, what did you do to the helicopter? Why is it gone?" Howard, who was in a natural fall, was stunned. The gentleman's hat on his head had long been thrown away by the strong wind. The mustache on his face was blown askew. He could only spread his limbs weakly and fell toward the ocean with a spread posture. This was a phenomenon that could not be explained by science. No matter how hard he racked his brain, he could not come up with an answer in time. Moreover, the current dangerous situation made it difficult for Howard to maintain his gentlemanly image and scream. "Calm down, I'm here. What are you afraid of?" Next to Howard, who was screaming in agony, Kyle also fell down. With a calm expression, he said, "If you want to work for me, then from now on, throw away your past values and ideals. I want to take you out of the shackles of the Earth's current framework and overturn everything." As they spoke, the 2 of them had already fallen close to the surface of the sea. Cale suddenly reached out and grabbed Howard's suit jacket. The hood of the leather jacket spread open a pair of dark red wings behind it. Cale lifted Howard's body and decelerated in the air with Venom's gliding ability. When he was 5 meters above the sea, he pulled out an item card and threw it down, materializing it into a modern speedboat. Cale slowly landed on the deck. He stood firm and let go of Howard. Howard held the railing of the speedboat with his soft feet and gasped for breath. After a long while, Howard finally calmed down. He stared at Cale in disbelief and asked, How did you do that just now?" "This is one of my abilities. I can store items in another dimension and use them at any time," Cale explained without hiding anything. He waved his hand and several item cards fell on the deck of the speedboat, materializing into a sun chair, a sun umbrella, a round table, red wine. This is not scientific at all. Looking at this magical scene that was like a magic trick, Howard couldn't help but smile bitterly, but he sat on the sun chair and poured himself half a glass of red wine. "I never said this was science. In fact, there are many things in this world that cannot be explained by science. In the future, you may see gods flying in the sky, magic that makes people's souls out of their bodies, or even travel across the universe and back in time." Cale shrugged. He did these things not to show off, but to help Howard break through the old conceptual framework of this era. Howard was now one of the world's top engineers at the forefront of science, and his ideas were also advanced enough. However, in Kyle's opinion, the old era's technological standards and inflexible ideas were firmly restraining this noble soul that was burdened by knowledge. Across half a century, grasping the anti-gravity levitation technology, researching the Rubik's Cube, and obtaining the elemental structure diagram of new energy, this kind of technological talent is definitely not much worse than the future Iron Man Tawny. The only difference is that he was born in the wrong era. Cale wants to help Howard to subvert and break the ideological constraints of the old era, and let him become the greatest help in providing advanced technology. "This is yours." Howard drank a glass first to calm himself down, then poured a glass for Cale, looked straight at him and asked seriously, "Cale, tell me the truth. Are you a god or an alien?" "Of course I'm just a human above ordinary people." Cale chuckled, picked up his glass, took a sip of red wine, and said meaningfully, "But it's hard to say what will happen in the future. I will become a god and stand above the gods, do you believe that?" "I believe. You are a person who constantly creates miracles and subverts the imagination of others. Your vision and experience often surprise me. If there is a God, I believe he will also be surprised by you." Howard laughed. "Howard Stark." Kyle looked straight into Howard's eyes and went straight to the point. I can give you a long enough lifespan, and the family will protect you from harm for the rest of your life. I can let you see the city of the future, the scenery of Earth in the next century, and the beauty of technology in the alien universe. This really is like the temptation from the demon in fairy tales. Howard fell into deep thought and asked calmly, "What price do I have to pay?" Kyle smiled and said something that made it difficult for Howard to remain calm. "There's no need to pay any price." "Why?" Howard frowned. "Because the road I want to walk is too long and lonely. Blindly using methods to rope people in is not to my taste. If you can use scientific resources to walk beside me, then that is enough to make me feel gratified." Cale spread out his hands and said uninterestedly. The other party was one of the few people in this world that he could sincerely treat as a friend. He did not intend to use forceful methods to erase this meaning. Howard's body trembled when he heard this and said with emotion, "Cale, I misspoke just now. It's because I care too much about profit and loss as a businessman. If you can really do that, then the entire Stark Industries under my name will be given to you. I don't even mind paying any price. As long as in the future, I can continue to research new scientific products and explore scientific truths, that will be enough." You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.